Somewhere, years from this night, a sword made of ash and light cuts through an army like paper. That's not tonight. Tonight, I'm 14, and I can't even make a fist without my hand shaking. I am born under a red moon. That's the whole crime. Nobody asks the sky why it turned that color. They just decide it's my fault. The midwife drops me the second she sees my eyes catch the light through the window red on red. She doesn't apologize. She backs away like I might bite. Blood moon child, she whispers. Word travels faster than I can cry. By the time I'm 6, servants stop meeting my eyes. My own brothers, Edric and Rowan, won't share a table with me unless our father orders it. The court mage, a bony old man named Pharaoh, calls me the seal on the coming ash to my face, like I'm not standing right there, like I can't understand words yet. I understand every one of them. I asked my mother once why nobody likes me. They're afraid, she says. Fear isn't the same as truth. I hold on to that line for years. I don't know yet how expensive it is. When I'm 10, 3 of the palace guards decide to test the rumor. They corner me in the training yard, laughing, calling it a lesson. Let's see what a cursed prince bleeds, one of them says. I don't have a knife. I don't have training. I have 2 fists that don't know how to close right and a mouth that won't stop talking back. I go down in 4 seconds. They don't break anything. They're careful a prince, even a cursed one, still has value alive. But they leave bruises on my ribs that take 2 weeks to fade, and they leave something else that never does, the exact knowledge of how little I can do when someone decides to hurt me. I don't tell my father. I don't tell anyone. I just remember the shape of my own helplessness. I'll need that memory later. Right now it's just shame. The night my father dies, I'm asleep. I wake to screaming down the hall, not the scream of murder, the scream of discovery. By the time I reach the throne room, guards already have me by both arms. My father is on the floor by his own throne, his ceremonial sword through his chest. It's a sword I've seen 100 times, mounted on the wall behind that same throne. Someone took it down. There, says a voice I know too well. Valtor, my father's brother, stands near the door, face arranged into perfect grief. The boy was seen coming from these very doors not a quarter hour past midnight. 2 servants I don't recognize either of them, which should tell everyone something, tells no one anything not along. We saw him, one says. Standing right there. Blood on his hands. I don't have blood on my hands. I look. Nothing. Nobody else looks. Pharaoh the court mage steps forward, and for the first time in 14 years he seems almost pleased. The prophecy, he says, loud enough for the whole hall. The blood moon always collects. I open my mouth to say I was in my room, I was asleep. Ask the guard outside my door, he'll tell you when I stop. Because I look at Volter's face and I understand, all at once, the way you understand a held breath is about to end badly. This was never going to be a trial. This was decided before I woke up. 3 days later, Valtor visits me in the cell they've put me in, not a dungeon, something almost respectful, a locked room with a window, because I'm still royal blood and appearances matter to him even now. He doesn't gloat. That's the worst part. He talks to me like we're solving a problem together. Here is what happens, he says. Either you stand before the court and confess the curse finally showing its true face, exactly as everyone always feared, and I have you exiled instead of executed, because I am merciful. Or you fight this, you demand a real trial, you drag it out. He shrugs. And your mother and your sister die as accomplices to the blood moon's ambition. The people will demand it. I'll simply be the man who listens to them. You killed him, I say. It isn't a question. I need to say it once, out loud, even if it changes nothing. Valtor doesn't confirm it. He doesn't deny it either. He just watches me do the math. There isn't math to do. There's one answer. I'll confess, I say. He smiles like I've done something clever instead of something forced. Good boy. They hold the confession in the same throne room where my father died. The whole court is there. My brothers won't look at me. Edric stares at the floor, Rowan stares at Valtor like a man learning who actually rules now. My mother is not permitted to speak. My sister is 9 and doesn't understand any of it and keeps trying to reach for me until a guard steps in front of her. I say the words Valtor wrote for me. I killed my father. The curse is real. I accept exile in place of the headsman's mercy. The hall erupts not in horror. In relief. People who spent 14 years flinching at the sight of me now cheer like a debt's been paid. An old woman near the front actually claps. A man shouts burn the ash before it spreads. And 3 others laugh at that like it's wit. I used to think, as a child, that if I ever did something to prove the fear wrong, the fear would stop. I understand now that isn't how fear works. Fear doesn't need to be right. It just needs somewhere to point. They strip my name from the royal registry that same hour. A scribe crosses it out of the succession scrolls in front of me, like watching himself do something distasteful but necessary. From this moment I am not Cashin of House Ardwile. I am nothing they've bothered to name yet. They march me out at dawn 6 guards, no chains, because chains would suggest I might still matter enough to escape and be hunted properly. Valtor stands on the palace steps to watch me go, and for 1 second, just one, something in his face isn't performance. It's satisfaction. Real, uncomplicated satisfaction. I memorize that face. I don't know yet what I'll do with it. I just know I don't want to forget it. They walk me 3 days east, toward a border nobody guards because nobody needs to. The Ashlands don't require a wall. They require nothing. That's the point. The guard captain, a man named Doran who said maybe 10 words this whole march, finally stops at the edge of a cracked gray plain that used to be farmland before something burned it decades back. This is as far as the crown's writ goes, he says. Past this, you're not our problem. What am I supposed to eat? I ask. It's the first honest question I've had the nerve to ask in 3 days. Doran almost looks sorry. Almost. Not our problem, he says again, and turns his horse around. I walk until the palace is a shape I can't find anymore behind me. Then I keep walking because stopping means thinking, and I'm not ready for that yet. By afternoon I reach a cluster of farmhouses at the very edge of the wasted land, the last village before nothing. I'm hungry enough to knock on a door and ask, which is either brave or stupid, and it turns out to be both. The farmer who opens the door goes pale before I say a word. He's heard the story already. Word rides faster than exiles walk. Cursed prince, he says, not to me, to the neighbor 2 houses down, who's already stepping outside with a hoe in his hand like it's a weapon he's rehearsed with. I just want food, I say. I'll work for it. You'll bring the curse down on us, the farmer says, and by now there are 4 of them, 5, drawn by the noise, drawn by the story, drawn by 14 years of being told exactly what I am. The one with the hoe swings first. I don't have a blade. I don't have training that means anything against a man swinging a farm tool with his whole back into it. I duck the first swing on instinct and the second one catches my shoulder, and it hurts in a way that makes the world go very quiet and very loud at once. I run. Not fight, run. Between 2 houses, over a low fence, through a field of dead crops that cut my hands as I scramble through them. Someone throws a rock that catches me between the shoulder blades. Another voice, older, a woman's, screaming for the others to catch him before he curses the well. I don't stop running until the farmhouses are gone and the light is gone and there's nothing around me but gray ground and gray sky and the sound of my own breathing, ragged, alone. I sit down because my legs won't carry me another step. My shoulder throbs. My hands are bleeding from the field. Somewhere behind me is everything I used to be. Somewhere ahead of me is land that kills people for sport, according to every story I've ever heard. I used to be a prince who couldn't throw a punch. Now I'm nobody, in the Ashlands, with no food, no weapon, and a wound already swelling under my shirt. I don't cry. I think I used up all of that back in the throne room, watching them cheer. I just sit there until the first stars come out over a land that doesn't have a name for what I am yet, and somewhere in the dark, something large enough to hear a mile off starts moving toward the sound of my breathing. The thing moving toward me in the dark turns out to be a wild dog, thin as a blade, more scared of me than I am of it. It sniffs the blood on my hands, decides I'm not worth the risk, and vanishes into the gray. I laugh. It comes out cracked, more air than sound. First night in the Ashlands and the worst thing that finds me runs away. I don't sleep so much as lose consciousness in short stretches, waking every time the wind changes. By morning my shoulder has gone stiff and purple where the hoe caught it, and my stomach has stopped complaining and started hurting instead, which I'm told is worse. I start walking because walking is easier than deciding where to walk to. By midday I find a man crouched over a dead rabbit, skinning it badly, hands shaking. He's older than me by maybe 10 years, dressed in rags that used to be a merchant's coat, and the second he sees me he grabs the rabbit and backs away like I've come to steal it. "It's mine," he says. "Found it first." "I don't want your rabbit," I say, which is a lie. "I want it badly." He doesn't believe me. Nobody out here believes anyone. He comes at me with the skinning knife, not fast, not trained, just desperate, and desperate is dangerous in a way I haven't learned to respect yet. I step wrong. He doesn't. The blade catches my forearm, shallow but long, and the shock of it makes me grab his wrist before I've decided to. We go down together in the dirt, and it isn't a fight so much as two starving people trying to hold onto the same knife. I win because he's weaker than me, not because I'm skilled. That's the whole truth of it. I pin his arm, the knife falls, and he goes still under me, breathing hard, waiting to die. I let him go. I take half the rabbit. He doesn't thank me. I don't expect him to. Walking away, I understand something new. Out here, winning doesn't require being strong. It just requires being slightly less weak than whoever's in front of you. I file that away without knowing yet how much it will matter. 2 days later, 4 men find me instead of the other way around. I hear them before I see them, voices, low, coordinated, the sound of people who've done this before. I'm crossing a shallow ravine, exposed on both sides, and by the time I realize it's a trap I'm already inside it. "Well," says the one in front, older, missing half an ear. "Looks like the crown's little curse wandered right into us." They know who I am. Of course they do. A boy alone in the ashlands with a princess bearing even in rags isn't hard to place, and a bounty on my head would have reached even here by now. Vultures reach or just opportunists, it doesn't matter. For men with knives and a length of rope don't care about the difference. I run for the only high ground in sight, a shelf of broken rock jutting from the ravine wall. It's not strategy, it's instinct. But halfway up I realize what I've actually done, forced them to come at me one at a time through a gap barely wide enough for a single man. The first one up the rocks gets my boot in his jaw. He falls back into the second, and for 1 second there are 2 men tangled together at the base of the shelf instead of 4 men surrounding me. I grab a stone the size of my fist and I don't throw it like a weapon, I drop it, straight down, onto the man still climbing. It catches his shoulder and he screams and lets go, and now it's 2 down, 2 left. The half-ear man doesn't climb. He's smarter than that. He waits at the bottom, patient, knowing I have to come down eventually. I do come down, but not where he expects. There's a second gap in the rocks, narrow, that drops behind him instead of in front. I take the fall hard, land wrong, feel something in my ankle twist, and I'm on him before he turns around fully. It isn't clean. It isn't a duel. It's 2 bodies slamming into rock and dirt, his knife opening a line across my ribs before I get his wrist pinned the same way I pinned the rabbit man's, except this time he doesn't stop struggling and I have to hit him, again, until he does. The 4th man runs. I sit in the ravine afterward, ankle swelling, ribs bleeding, and I've won. 3 men down, 1 fled. I should feel something like triumph. I mostly feel like I'm going to be sick. The wound across my ribs won't stop weeping blood through the makeshift wrap I tear from my own shirt. The ankle won't take my full weight. I've been in the ashlands 4 days and I'm already running on damage I don't know how to fix. Which is exactly the condition I'm in when the ground starts to shift under my next step, not shift like uneven rock, shift like something breathing beneath a thin crust of dried mud. I don't understand what I'm looking at until it's already rising, something long and grayscaled, low to the ground, built like a lizard that forgot how to stop growing, easily twice my length, with a mouth that opens wider than seems physically reasonable. It isn't fast. That's the only mercy. It's heavy, and heavy things telegraph their moves. I still lose. I put everything I have left into avoiding the first bite. I do avoid it and the tail catches me across the chest on the follow-through, and the world tips sideways in a way that has nothing to do with my ankle anymore. I hit the ground and the air leaves me completely, and I understand, with total clarity, that I don't have anything left to fight with. Not strength. Not a plan. Not even fear, really just a kind of flat, exhausted acceptance. The creature circles. Takes its time. It has no reason to hurry. I think, distantly, of my sister reaching for me before the guard blocked her hand. I think that's an unfair thing to think about right before dying, and then I stop thinking anything at all. The creature doesn't get to finish. There's a sound like a chime made of steel, once, and the beast's circling stops mid-stride. A second sound follows immediately after wetter and the huge gray shape simply stops being a threat, folding sideways into the dirt with a single clean wound across its throat that I never saw delivered. A man steps over its body like it's a fallen branch in his path. He's old 60, maybe older, hard to tell under sun-cracked skin and a beard gone fully white, but he moves like the age hasn't reached whatever's underneath it. He carries a sword that looks too plain for the wound it just made, no engravings, no ornament, just a length of dulled gray steel that clearly has never needed to look impressive to do its job. He crouches beside me. Doesn't ask if I'm alright, which is good, because I very obviously am not. 3 bandits and a ridgeback in 1 week, he says, mostly to himself, looking at my wounds with the flat assessment of someone counting inventory rather than expressing concern. That's either very unlucky or very stubborn. I try to answer. What comes out isn't words. Don't talk, he says. Bleed less instead. He gets an arm under me, and I'm aware, in the last clear moment before the dark takes me properly this time, that he's stronger than his age has any right to allow, and that for the first time since the throne room, since the cheering, since the walk east with 6 guards who wouldn't look at me, someone has chosen to help me without asking first what I am. I don't know his name yet. I'll have years to learn it. I surface twice before I stay awake. The first time, it's firelight and the smell of something cooking that isn't rabbit. I try to sit up, and a hand, the same hand that killed the ridgeback, without visible effort presses flat against my chest, not hard, just final. Not yet, the old man says. He's stitching something. I realize after a moment it's me. I go back under before I can decide whether that should frighten me. The second time, it's daylight, and I'm alone in what I slowly understand is a cave mouth turned into a living space, a fire pit, a few worn blankets, weapons racked with more care than the rest of the space seems to get. My ribs are bound properly now, my ankle splinted. Someone has done this before, many times, on people who mattered enough to bother with. When he comes back in, arms full of dry wood, he doesn't look surprised to find me awake and watching him. You're the one they're calling the cursed prince, he says. Not a question. There's no point lying to a man who's already seen me bleed. Yes. I wait for the flinch, the step back, the look I've had memorized since I was 6 years old. It doesn't come. He just drops the wood by the fire and starts feeding it in, unbothered, like I've told him the weather. You don't believe it, I say. The curse. I don't believe most things people are afraid of, he says. Fear's cheap. Costs nothing to have it, costs everything to check if it's true. He glances at me, and for the first time there's something assessing in it, something that isn't pity. You're not cursed. You're just very bad at surviving. Those aren't the same problem. I killed 3 men this week, I say, because it feels important that he know that too, the worst of it, before whatever this is goes any further. Bandits who'd have killed you first, he says. That's not a curse either. That's Tuesday, out here. I don't have an answer for that. I lie back and look at the cave ceiling and try to decide if trusting this man is the same mistake as trusting anyone else who's ever looked at me without immediate fear, Veltor included. What do you want with me? I finally ask. He doesn't answer right away. He finishes with the fire, sits back on his heels, and studies me the way I imagine a smith studies a piece of raw ore, not for what it is, but for what it could become if struck correctly, often enough, in the right places. Haven't decided yet, he says. Get some sleep. We'll talk when you can stand without shaking. I don't know if that's an invitation or a warning. Out here, 4 days in, I've learned they can be the same thing. I sleep anyway. It's the first time in a week I don't wake up bleeding. His name is Raziel. He tells me on the 3rd morning, while I'm still relearning how to stand without the cave spinning. Once a blade master of the Royal Guard, he says, like it costs him nothing to say, though I notice he doesn't look at me when he says it. Exiled on a lie, the same as you. Difference is nobody bothered writing a prophecy about me. Easier to just erase a name than curse it. Why help me, then? I ask. If the crown did the same to you. He hands me a bowl of something thin and gray that turns out to taste better than it looks. Haven't decided if I'm helping you, he says. Might just be feeding a stray until it's strong enough to hunt on its own. I decide not to ask again. I eat instead. The first spar happens on the 5th day, before my ribs have fully closed, which I point out. Bandits won't wait for your ribs either, Raziel says, and tosses me a wooden practice sword that's heavier than it looks. I last 4 seconds. I don't mean that as an exaggeration. I count, afterward, lying on my back in the dirt outside the cave, staring at the sky, genuinely trying to work out where the 4 seconds went. He doesn't hit hard. He doesn't need to. He simply isn't where my swing expects him to be, and then his own blade is resting against my throat before I finish the thought that I should probably defend myself. Again, he says. I last 4 seconds 9 more times that morning. By the 10th, I've stopped being surprised by it, which Raziel says is progress, though it doesn't feel like any. The weeks blur into a shape I only recognize afterward. Looking back, though, I try not to look back, try to stay inside each day as it happens instead of already living in the memory of it. Raziel doesn't teach me to swing harder. He teaches me to breathe. Your breath moves before your blade does, he says, standing behind me on a morning cold enough to see it in the air. Control one, you control the other. Panic breathes shallow and high. Death breathes shallow and high. Don't let your body confuse the two. We sit for an hour at a time, breathing, doing nothing else, until my legs go numb and my mind, starved of anything to occupy it, finally goes quiet in a way it hasn't since before the throne room. Then we spar again. I last 6 seconds. Then 8. Progress measured in single digits, which should feel insulting and somehow doesn't. The 10th day, he throws real stakes into the training, not swords, first, but running. He sends me up the ridge above the cave at dawn, empty-handed, and tells me a storm is coming off the eastern flats and I'd better be back before it hits or I sleep outside in it. I don't make it back in time. The storm catches me on the exposed rock, wind flat and vicious, sand fine ash stinging every inch of skin I haven't covered, and I spend 3 hours pressed into a crevice too shallow to fully shelter in, shaking, furious, certain this is some kind of punishment I don't understand yet. When I finally stumble back to the cave, soaked and half frozen, Raziel is sitting by the fire like he never left it. You survived, he says. Not an apology. Almost approval. You could have told me the storm was coming. I did. I said it might. He nods at the fire, an invitation to sit. The world won't warn you clearly either. Better you learn that from weather than from a blade. I hate him a little, that night. I also sleep better than I have in weeks. The bandit skills I already had, the desperate, ugly, barely their survival instincts from the ravine and the ridgeback. Raziel doesn't discard them. He sharpens them. You fought that beast with your whole body committed to one idea, don't die, he tells me, weeks in, both of us circling each other on cracked ground with wooden blades. That's not nothing. Most men freeze. You didn't freeze. But commitment without control just gets you killed slower. He shows me how to read a stance the way he reads mine: shoulders before hands, weight before feet, breath before intention. I start losing by smaller margins. 10 seconds. 15. Once, memorably, almost 30, before he ends it with a strike to my wrist that makes the practice sword fly out of my hand and land somewhere in the dark past the firelight. Better, he says, which from him is close to a parade. The night that matters most doesn't happen during a spar. It happens after one, both of us sitting by the fire, my hands still stinging from the day's bout, when I finally ask him the question I've been circling for weeks without quite landing on it. What am I training for? I ask. You keep making me stronger. You've never once asked what I want to do with it. Raziel doesn't answer immediately. He feeds a piece of dry brush into the fire, watches it catch. Because it matters more than the training does, he finally says. Strength without a reason behind it doesn't serve the man carrying it. It consumes him instead. I've seen it happen to better men than either of us. Something moves behind his eyes, old and unhealed, and I understand, without him saying it, that he isn't speaking only in theory. So, what is it? Vengeance, or justice? They look similar from a distance. They are not the same road. I open my mouth to answer immediately, of course it's vengeance. I want to say, I want Valtor to feel exactly what he took from me, and then I stop, because saying it out loud in front of this man feels like it would cost something I'm not ready to spend yet. I don't know, I say instead, and it's the most honest thing I've said since the throne room. Raziel nods slowly, like that's the only acceptable answer a boy my age could give. Good, he says. Anyone who knows too quickly is usually lying to themselves. Find the real answer before you find the strength to act on it. Otherwise the strength finds the wrong answer for you. We sit in the quiet after that, the fire between us, the ashlands stretching dark and silent in every direction outside the cave mouth. It's the first time since the guards marched me east that I feel something other than fear, grief, or the flat exhaustion of survival. It isn't happiness. It's smaller than that, and steadier, something closer to being, for one evening, simply a person sitting by a fire instead of a curse walking through the world. The next morning's spar is the one I remember clearest, because it's the one where something finally changes. Raziel comes at me with the same opening he's used 100 times, the one I've never once solved. Except this time my breath is already even before he moves. I feel it happen, the strange calm of a body that has finally stopped panicking on command instead of by accident, and when his blade comes for my shoulder I'm not quite where it expects me to be. Not far off. Barely a hand's width. But enough that my own wooden blade, thrown out on instinct rather than plan, catches him across the ribs before his strike lands anywhere near my throat. We both freeze. It's not a real victory. He could have adjusted, could have ended it a heartbeat later if he'd wanted to. We both know that. But he doesn't finish it. He just lowers his blade and looks at the spot where I hit him, and then at me, with an expression I haven't seen on him before. Not pride, exactly, but something adjacent to it. There it is, he says quietly. There's what? The beginning, he says, and for the first time since I stumbled into his life half dead in a ravine, he actually smiles. Took you long enough? I don't smile back. I'm too busy trying to memorize the exact feeling in my body right before I struck, the calm, the timing, the absence of panic, because some instinct older than conscious thought already knows I'm going to need to find that feeling again, on purpose, against something far worse than a wooden sword. I don't know yet how soon. Months pass the way water wears down stone, too slow to see, undeniable once you look back at the shape it's left behind. I stop counting the days after the first month. Raziel never counted them for me either. The spar that took him 4 seconds to end now takes him most of a minute. I know because he tells me, flat and unimpressed, like a man reading weather. A minute, he says. Congratulations. A real killer would still have you dead. Encouraging, I say. Encouragement gets you killed slower than honesty does. I've stopped arguing with that particular philosophy. It's easier to just keep training. The storms get worse as the season turns, and Raziel uses every one of them. He drills me in wind that would knock a lesser stance flat, has me hold forms in freezing rain until my hands lock around the practice sword out of pure stubbornness rather than strength. My body changes without my noticing it happening, leaner, harder, the softness of a sheltered prince burned off by ash and repetition. We hunt together now instead of him feeding me. Small game mostly, but twice we track larger things through the wasteland, creatures that would have ended me alone in my first week, and now barely slow the two of us down working as one unit. You're not fighting like you're trying to survive anymore, Raziel notes, after we bring down something with too many legs and not enough sense to run from two armed men. You're fighting like you expect to win. That's new. Is that good? It's dangerous, he says. Expecting to win and being able to are different problems. Don't confuse them. I file that warning away the way I've filed away most of his warnings, respectfully, and without fully believing it applies to me yet. The pack finds us on a gray morning, 7 of them, low ash wolves that hunt in coordinated silence rather than the frenzied noise I'd expect from animals. Raziel spots them first, 3 heartbeats before I do, already moving. Together, he says. Watch the flanks. Don't get proud. It's the first real fight we've had side by side against a genuine threat, not training, not hunting something smaller than us. The wolves come in waves, testing, circling, looking for the gap between two fighters that isn't watching the same direction as the other. There isn't one. Raziel has drilled the space between us so many times in practice that my body simply knows where he is without looking. When I step left, it's because his blade is already covering my right. When he pivots, it's because I've claimed the ground behind him a half second before he needed it claimed. 3 wolves go down before the other 4 decide the odds have changed enough to run. I'm breathing hard, blood not mine, mostly down one arm, and there's something unfamiliar sitting in my chest that takes me a moment to name. Not fear. Not the flat exhaustion of barely surviving. Something closer to satisfaction. Raziel studies my face like he's reading exactly that thought off it. There it is again, he says. There's what again? He doesn't answer. He just cleans his blade and starts walking, and I understand, following him, that whatever he saw in my face is something he's watching for on purpose, building toward, the way he's built everything else these past months, one deliberate stone at a time. The Alpha finds us 3 weeks later, and it isn't an accident that it does. Raziel has been tracking its territory for days, closing the distance with a patience I don't fully understand until we're standing at the mouth of a wide stone basin and he tells me, without ceremony, that this fight is mine alone. I could kill it, he says. That wouldn't teach you anything except that I can kill it. You need to know what you can do, not what I can. And if I can't? Then I'm standing right here, he says. But I won't step in until there's nothing left to learn from letting you try. The Alpha is nothing like the Ridgeback that nearly killed me my first week in the Ashlands. It's larger, faster despite its size, and it moves like it's fought 100 things bigger than itself and won every time. The moment it sees me alone in the basin, it doesn't circle cautiously the way lesser predators do. It simply attacks. The first exchange goes entirely to the Alpha. I get a cut across my thigh I don't even register until I'm already rolling away from the follow-up bite, and the ground where I was standing a half second earlier is a crater where its claws struck instead. I'm fast. Months of training have made me genuinely fast, but the creature is simply operating on a different scale of power, and fast doesn't matter when the thing hunting you can close distance in a single bound. I try everything Raziel taught me. Breath control. Reading its weight before it commits. None of it slows it down enough. It catches my shoulder on the third exchange and throws me bodily across the basin, and I land hard enough that the world goes white at the edges for a full second before pain drags it back into focus. I look up. It's already coming again. I think, in the strange clarity that fear sometimes produces instead of erasing, of the throne room. Of the crowd cheering my downfall. Of my sister's hand reaching for me before the guard blocked it. Of Raziel saying find the real answer before you find the strength to act on it, and realizing, in this basin, bleeding, with something enormous bearing down on me, that I still don't have the answer, and I might die before I ever find it. That thought doesn't paralyze me. It does something else. Something ignites underneath it, not calm, not the careful breath control calm Raziel drilled into me, but something rawer, older, closer to the 4-second boy who wouldn't stop getting back up no matter how many times the world knocked him down. I don't decide to move. My body simply does, and it moves wrong, too fast, too much force behind it, like something inside me has stopped asking permission to spend everything it has all at once. The world narrows. Heat floods up through my chest and down both arms, and when I look at my own hands, they aren't quite my hands anymore, wrapped, suddenly, in tight ritual bindings I didn't put there, dark cloth that wasn't on my body a moment ago, already fraying at the edges from the force moving through them. My practice sword is gone. In its place is something heavier, black as void glass, thick as a woodsman's axe but shaped like a blade that was never meant to be elegant, only final. The Alpha lunges. I don't dodge this time. I need it. The impact should break my arm. It doesn't. The obsidian black blade goes through the joint of its foreleg like the limb was never solid in the first place, and the Alpha's roar turns to something higher, more startled, as it staggers sideways into the basin wall. I don't think. I follow. Every strike carries too much weight, too little precision. I'm swinging a blade like I'm trying to end the world with it rather than one creature, but each impact lands like a falling wall, and the Alpha, for the first time since it saw me alone in the basin, retreats a step. It's the last mistake it makes. I close the distance faster than the black blade's weight should allow, and the final strike goes through its throat with a force that ends the fight in a single motion. No finesse, no elegance, just absolute, overwhelming power finally aimed correctly. The Alpha falls. The basin goes quiet except for my own breathing, ragged, and underneath it a low hum I can feel in my teeth, in my bones, coming from the black blade and the bindings still tight around my forearms. Raziel steps into the basin slowly, studying me the way he studied the mark my wooden sword left on his ribs weeks ago, except this time the expression doesn't stay carefully neutral. Something crosses his face that looks almost like alarm, quickly buried under the calm he wears for everything. Cashin, he says. Look at your hands. I already am. I don't recognize them. The bindings, the residual heat still moving under my skin, the black blade now hanging heavy and strange at my side like it's always belonged there. None of it feels like something I did on purpose. It feels like something that was always underneath me, waiting for the exact moment I stopped being able to hold it back. What happened? I ask, and my voice comes out rougher than it should, like it's been used for something larger than speech. Raziel doesn't answer right away. He looks at the dead Alpha, then at the blade, then at me, and for the first time since he pulled me out of a ridgeback's path, I see something in his expression that isn't quite ready to be spoken aloud yet. The ash blade path, he finally says. First form. Sooner than I expected. Far sooner. He crouches by the alpha's body, examining the wound like it will tell him something the blade itself hasn't already. This is not a gift, Cashin. Remember that. It's a door. What's on the other side of it is entirely up to you. I look down at the black blade one more time, still humming faintly with whatever it just spent, and I think for the first time since the throne room, since the walk east, since the ravine and the ridgeback, and every night I fell asleep certain I wouldn't wake up again, that maybe, finally, I have something the world will have to take seriously. I don't yet understand how much that something is going to cost me. Word travels faster than I do, even out here. Raziel hears it first, from a trader who passes through the wasteland's edge every few months and doesn't ask questions as long as he's paid in something other than curiosity. They're calling you the Black Swordsman of the Ashlands, Raziel says, dropping a sack of grain by the fire. No name yet. Just a shape people are starting to be afraid of. Good, I say. Let them be afraid of something that isn't a rumor about a moon. Raziel doesn't share the satisfaction. Fear draws attention. Attention draws hunters better than the last ones. He looks at me for a long moment. You're not ready for what's coming. You just don't know that yet. I don't believe him. That's my first mistake in weeks. The morning after, we spar in the new form for the first time on purpose, rather than in the desperate accident of the basin. I call the black blade the way Raziel coaches me to, not summoned, he insists, drawn out. The way you draw breath rather than pull a lever, and the bindings tighten around my forearms, the weight settles into my grip, and for one triumphant second I feel unstoppable. Then I swing at Raziel, who's holding nothing but his old grey sword, and I put so much force behind it that I overbalance completely, stumble past him, and nearly put the black blade through a boulder that didn't deserve it. Control, Raziel says, not even bothering to look impressed by the boulder now split in two. You have the ocean now instead of a cup. Doesn't mean you know how to pour it yet. I try again. And again. Every strike carries too much. I overcommit, overswing, tire twice as fast as I should because the form eats through my own strength to fuel itself. By midday I can barely lift the blade at all, drained in a way sparring with the practice sword never left me. That's the price of it, Raziel says, watching me sit in the dirt, arms shaking. Power like that isn't free. You'll learn to spend it wisely, or it'll spend you instead. They find me 5 days later, not Raziel, just me, out gathering water at the edge of our territory, because a mistake that small is apparently all it takes. 6 of them, mounted, wearing the red-dyed leathers of the Red Ravens, a mercenary band with enough of a reputation that even Raziel's face changes slightly when I describe them to him afterward. Their leader, a broad-shouldered woman with a scar splitting one eyebrow, looks at me like she's already counting the bounty. The Black Swordsman, she says. Smaller than the stories. Stories exaggerate, I say. We'll see. They come at me together, not staggered like the bandits in the ravine months ago, not testing like the Alpha did before I earned its respect the hard way. They come at me like professionals who've killed men better armed than I look, all at once, from 6 directions. I draw the black blade. The first 2 exchanges go my way, pure overwhelming force, exactly what the form is built for, and 2 ravens go down hard enough that they won't be getting up soon. But Raziel's warning was right and I ignored it. I'm already burning through strength I don't have an infinite supply of, and the remaining 4 adjust fast, spreading wider, forcing me to turn, and turn, and turn again, never letting me plant my feet long enough to land a clean strike. A blade opens my back before I even see who swung it. Another catches my hip. I'm bleeding from 4 places by the time I finally corner the scarred leader against a rock face and end the fight the only way I have strength left to end it, one final, brutal swing that the black blade's weight turns lethal even though my arms are shaking too hard to have controlled it precisely. She goes down. The last 2 ravens flee, dragging a wounded third between them. I win. I also collapse the moment the threat is gone, and I don't remember much of the walk back to the cave except that it takes twice as long as it should, and Raziel is furious in the specific quiet way that scares me more than shouting would. You could have died, he says, stitching a gash across my back I can't see but can absolutely feel. 6 against 1, and you spent everything in the first minute like the fight was already over. I won. You survived, he corrects. There's a difference, and you're old enough now to understand it. He ties off the last stitch harder than necessary. The form gives you an ocean of power. You still fight like a man bailing water with his hands, throwing everything overboard at once instead of learning to sail with it. I don't have an answer for that, mostly because my whole body hurts too much to construct one. We start over, Raziel says. Not the fighting. The control. The next 2 weeks are worse than anything before them, and that includes the storm on the ridge. Raziel has me draw the black blade and hold the form, not fight in it, just hold it, standing perfectly still for longer and longer stretches, teaching my body to sustain the weight without hemorrhaging strength just to maintain it. The first day I can hold it for maybe 30 seconds before my knees buckle. By the end of the first week, minutes. By the end of the second, most of an hour, the burning drains settling into something manageable instead of catastrophic. Then we spar in the form properly for the first time, not wild, overcommit swings, but controlled strikes, each one costed carefully against what I actually need to spend to land it. There, Raziel says, after I land 3 consecutive strikes against him without once losing my footing. That's the difference between wielding it and being wielded by it. The Red Ravens come back, as I knew eventually they would, not the scarred leader, whom I killed, but her second, a lean man named Harrow, who spent the weeks since our first fight gathering a larger, angrier group and one clear piece of intelligence. I nearly died beating them the first time, so a second attempt with better numbers should finish the job. They find me in the open this time, not by accident. Harrow's tracked our territory carefully, chosen ground that favors numbers over maneuvering. 9 of them, more than double the first encounter. Raziel is a half-mile out, close enough to intervene, far enough that this fight is mine to prove something with, and we both know it without either of us saying so. I draw the black blade. This time I don't feel the reckless surge of triumphant power from the basin, from the first Ravens fight. I feel it the way Raziel taught me to feel it these past 2 weeks, present, immense, and entirely under control, like holding a drawn bow rather than an already loosed arrow. Harrow signals the charge. 9 Ravens close from every angle, the exact same tactic that nearly killed me the first time. It doesn't work the same way twice. I don't waste strength on the first exchange the way I did before. I let 2 of them commit fully, overextend, and I take them both in a single economical arc that costs a fraction of what my earlier wild swings did. I track my own strength the way Raziel drilled into me: spend here, conserve there, never let the form's hunger outpace my judgment about what the fight actually requires. By the 4th Raven down, the others start to hesitate. By the 6th, Harrow himself is backing away instead of directing the charge. I corner him the same way I cornered his predecessor, except this time my arms aren't shaking, my strikes are precise instead of desperate, and when I finally end it, the black blade moves with exactly the amount of force required and not one measure more. Harrow falls. The last 2 Ravens don't wait to see if they're next, they're already running before his body hits the ground. I stand in the aftermath, breathing hard but steady, blood on the blade but barely any of it mine this time, and Raziel walks out from where he was watching with an expression I've genuinely never seen on him before. That, he says, is the difference 2 weeks makes. I look down at my own hands, still wrapped, still humming faintly with the form's residual heat, and for the first time since the basin, since the Alpha, I don't feel like the power found me by accident. I feel like I finally caught up to it. Veltor doesn't send bandits this time. Raziel tells me that before I even ask, reading it off a different trader's face, a different kind of fear in the way the man refuses to meet either of our eyes. The Order of Ash, Raziel says, once the trader's gone. That's not a bounty anymore. That's the crown deciding you're worth a real hunter. What's the difference? Bandits want money. The Order wants you erased cleanly, quietly, and permanently. There's no version of that fight where losing means you get to run home and lick your wounds. I don't like how flat his voice goes when he says it. We find the Order's scout first, a lean man in gray robes, unarmed as far as I can tell, sitting perfectly still on a rock at the edge of our territory like he's been waiting for us specifically, which it turns out he has. You're not the Inquisitor, Raziel says. I'm not meant to be, the man replies. I'm meant to confirm you exist before he wastes his time. His eyes move to me, unhurried, cataloging. The black blade. The bindings. Interesting. He'll want to see that in person. I move to close the distance before he can run with what he's learned. He doesn't run. He simply raises one hand, and the air around it thickens into something visible, faint silver lines, almost like frost forming mid-motion, and I find my own legs suddenly, inexplicably slower, like wading through water that wasn't there a heartbeat ago. Raziel is already moving. His gray sword crosses the scout's guard twice, fast enough that I barely track it, and the man goes down before the silver lines around me finish forming into whatever they were going to become. Seals, Raziel says, crouching to check the body. Binding magic. The whole order trains in it. This was a low initiate barely slowed you. He looks up at me, and there's something careful in his expression, like he's choosing the next words deliberately. The Inquisitor himself will be worse. Much worse. He comes 3 days later, and he doesn't bother hiding his approach. That's the first thing that unsettles me. He walks directly toward our cave across open ground, alone, unhurried, like a man who has never once needed the element of surprise to win a fight. He's younger than I expect, maybe Raziel's age, but carrying it entirely differently, smooth, unmarked, the calm of someone who has simply never lost. His robes are the deep gray-black of the order, marked with silver sigils that seem to shift slightly even when he's standing still. Cashin of House Ardwile, he says, and my old name, unused in months, lands strangely in my ears. Or whatever they're calling you out here now. The Black Swordsman. He says it without mockery, which is somehow worse than if he'd sneered it. My name is Kellen. I'd like this to be quick. You could just leave, I say. I could, he agrees. I won't. I draw the black blade. The bindings tighten around my forearms, and for a moment, only a moment, I let myself believe the last month of training, the control I fought so hard to earn against the Ravens, will be enough here too. Kellen doesn't draw a weapon. He simply raises both hands, and the silver sigils on his robes begin to move in earnest, lifting off the fabric entirely, hanging in the air around him like a slow, deliberate storm assembling itself. Round 1 goes to him completely. I charge, the way the form wants me to charge, full committed force behind the black blade, and 3 of the silver sigils snap forward faster than anything that size should move, wrapping around my sword arm mid-swing. The blade stops dead in the air, my whole arm locked rigid, and Kellen simply steps to the side and lets a 4th sigil catch me across the ribs, a blow that feels less like being struck and more like being unmade, slightly, cold in a way no wound has ever been cold. I break the binding through sheer force, tearing my arm free hard enough to strain something in my shoulder, and I try again, smaller, more controlled, the way Raziel taught me against the Ravens. Round 2 goes to him too. He reads the control the same way he read the raw aggression. Every measured strike I throw, a sigil is already there to intercept it, wrapping wrist or blade or ankle, and I realize with rising panic that this isn't a fight I can out-technique. He isn't fighting my sword. He's fighting my intentions, half a heartbeat before I commit to them. You're strong, Kellen says, almost gently, circling while 3 more sigils gather around his raised hand. Genuinely. The order underestimated how far the path had already taken you. But strength isn't the same as understanding what you're up against. Round 3, he ends it. A full lattice of silver light closes around me from every direction at once, faster than I can track, faster than the black blade's raw power can cut through before it fully seats, and I feel my limbs lock, my breath catch, cold spreading from every point of contact toward my chest like frost racing across still water. I understand, with total clarity and no time left to act on the understanding, that in a few more seconds I won't simply lose this fight. I'll be bound completely, permanently, the way the scout's rising sigils were only ever a rough sketch of. I can't move enough to fight it. I can't move enough to run. Raziel doesn't announce himself. There's simply a gray blur at the edge of my locking vision, and then 2 of the sigils holding me shatter outright, struck with a precision that makes Kellen's calm expression finally break into something like surprise. What follows isn't a fight I fully witness. I'm still half frozen, fighting my own body just to stay conscious, but what I catch of it reorders everything I thought I understood about what Raziel actually is. He doesn't meet the sigils with force. He moves between them, through gaps I can't see forming, his gray sword finding lines that shouldn't exist in a storm of magic assembled to leave no lines at all. Kellen, come a moment ago, is suddenly retreating, both hands raised, sigils rebuilding faster and faster, and none of it fast enough. You were a royal blade master, Kellen says, backing away, genuine respect breaking through the composure for the first time. I'd heard the stories. I didn't credit them. Credit them less than you should, Raziel says, and closes the distance one final time. He doesn't kill Kellen. I understand that only afterward, once the cold has finally released my limbs enough to sit up. Raziel simply ends the fight decisively enough that the Inquisitor breaks, retreating across open ground faster than he arrived, silver sigils guttering out behind him like a fire-denied air. Neither of us speaks for a long while afterward. Raziel checks my wounds first, the frost-cold gashes across my ribs, my locked shoulder slowly loosening again, and only once he's satisfied I'm not about to die does he finally sit back on his heels and let something like exhaustion show on his own face. I could have died, I say. It isn't a question. You would have, Raziel says. There's no comfort offered alongside the honesty. The order doesn't send anyone who isn't dangerous. Kellen wasn't even their strongest. I stare at the ground, at my own hands, still faintly humming with a form that felt, an hour ago, like the answer to every problem I'd ever have. The blade isn't enough. No, Raziel agrees. Strength like yours will always eventually meet something it can't simply overpower. That's not a flaw in you. It's the entire shape of the world. He looks at me carefully. You wanted to know what you're training for. Here's part of the answer. Whether you like it or not, you're not strong enough yet. Not for what's coming. Not for him. He doesn't say Walter's name. He doesn't need to. I sit with that failure longer than I've sat with any of the others, longer than the throne room, longer than the ravine, longer than every bruise the world has left on me since I was 6 years old and couldn't make a proper fist. Because all those failures were about surviving. This one is about a ceiling I didn't know existed until I hit it, hard, with everything I had. Raziel puts a hand on my shoulder, brief, uncharacteristically gentle. Rest tonight, he says. Tomorrow we start finding what's past it. I don't sleep well. But for the first time, the fear keeping me awake isn't about what the world might do to me. It's about how much further I still have to go before I can do something about it. We don't talk much for a week after the Inquisitor. Raziel drills me harder instead, less spirit, more structure, drilling the black blade's control into something closer to instinct than effort. I don't ask what comes after control. I've learned by now he tells me when he's ready, not when I push. It's a quiet night, no storm, no warning, when the quiet turns out to be the warning itself. I wake to Raziel's hand over my mouth, not rough, just fast. His eyes are already on the cave entrance. 6, he breathes, barely sound at all. Maybe more outside it. Move when I move. I don't ask how he knows. I've stopped questioning the things Raziel simply knows. They come through the entrance in a tight, practiced formation, black-wrapped, faces covered, blades already drawn, not order robes, not red raven leathers. Walter's own, then. Paid killers, or worse, soldiers who've been told this is loyalty. Raziel meets the first two before they've fully cleared the entrance. It isn't a fair fight for them. His gray sword moves like something that has done this exact motion 1,000 times before, and two bodies hit the cave floor before I've even drawn the black blade fully clear of its bindings. I take the third and fourth together, the form's weight finally something I can spend precisely instead of wastefully one strike each, economical, final, the 2 weeks of control training against the ravens paying for themselves in the dark. 5 and 6 come at Raziel from both sides at once, and I see it happen a half-second too late to stop it, a blade meant for his back that he turns just enough to survive outright, taking it instead across the side, deep, the kind of wound that doesn't announce itself as fatal immediately but is. He kills both of them anyway. That's the thing I'll never fully understand about him. Looking back, even mortally wounded, even in the dark, his sword doesn't slow down until the threat is actually gone. Then he goes down, not dramatically, just simply, like something finally allowed to stop holding itself up. Raziel. I'm at his side before I've decided to move. The wound is bad. I've seen enough wounds by now to know exactly how bad without needing him to tell me, and some part of me is already screaming at the rest of me to do something, anything, while another part, colder, already understands there's nothing left to do. Loud, he says, wincing. You're always loud when you're scared. Never noticed that about yourself. Don't talk. Save your strength. For what, he says, and it isn't really a question. He tries to laugh at his own joke and it turns into a cough that costs him more than it should. Listen to me. Longer than you'll want to. There's not much time for either of us to waste it. I press both hands against the wound anyway, uselessly, because doing nothing feels like agreeing with the part of me that already knows. The blood moon, Raziel says, voice steadying with effort. It's not a curse, Cassian. It never was. It's a story the crown built generations ago. Every gifted child born under it, marked, watched, and quietly removed the moment they became inconvenient to whoever sat the throne. You weren't the first. You won't be remembered as the last unless someone stops it. How do you know that? Because I watched it happen to someone else, 30 years before you, he says. That's why they exiled me. Not the lie they told the court. I saw what really happened to a blood moon child that year, and I said so, and saying so cost me everything I had. His hand finds my wrist, weaker than I've ever felt his grip. Your father didn't die by your hand. You already knew that. What you don't know yet, Valtor didn't act alone 30 years ago either. This has been the throne's habit for longer than either of us have been alive. I stare at him. Somewhere behind the grief already rising in my chest, something colder is forming, something that will take up permanent residence and never fully leave. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you needed to be strong before you needed to be angry, he says. Anger first would have gotten you killed by the second week. I've watched that happen too. He coughs again, and this time there's blood in it. You asked me once. Vengeance or justice? I told you to find the real answer before you found the strength to act on it. I still don't know the answer. You do, Raziel says. You just haven't said it out loud yet, because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost. His grip tightens, one last effort. Don't let it be only vengeance, Cashin. Vengeance ends when Valtor dies, and then what are you? Justice doesn't end there. Justice tears out the whole rotten root so this never happens to another child born on the wrong night under the wrong moon. Promise me that's the one you choose. I promise, I say, and I mean it more completely than I've meant anything since the throne room. Raziel's grip loosens. His breathing goes shallow, then shallower, and the last thing he says isn't about the path, or the crown, or vengeance, or justice. You were never cursed, he says. Just unlucky in who raised you first. I'm glad I got the second chance at it. He doesn't say anything after that. I don't know how long I sit there before I hear more footsteps outside, not careful this time, not stealthy, just more of Volter's men, sent to confirm the job the first 6 failed to finish. Something in me that has been carefully, deliberately controlled since the basin with the alpha simply stops being controlled. I draw the black blade, and for the first time it doesn't feel heavy at all. It feels like an extension of something already burning, already decided, already past the point where restraint serves any purpose whatsoever. There are 4 of them outside the cave, torches raised, clearly expecting to find bodies already cooling and nothing left to do but confirm it. I don't give them time to be surprised by what they find instead. The first one dies before he finishes registering that I'm not one of the 6 corpses inside. The second gets a scream out, cut short. I'm not fighting with technique anymore, not the careful economy Raziel spent 2 weeks teaching me. I'm fighting like the 4-second boy who kept getting back up no matter how many times the world knocked him down, except now that boy has a blade that ends things permanently and grief has burned away every part of him that used to hesitate. The third tries to run. I don't let him. The fourth drops his torch and his blade, both hands raised, already understanding that surrender means nothing tonight, that nothing he says will matter, and he's right, though I stop myself half a heartbeat before the final blow, not out of mercy, exactly, but because some small, distant part of me hears Raziel's voice asking whether this is vengeance or justice, and killing an unarmed, terrified messenger doesn't feel like either. Tell Valtor, I say, voice raw, barely recognizable to myself, that the Black Swordsman knows exactly what he did. Tell him the Blood Moon isn't finished with House Ardwile yet. The man runs. I let him. I bury Raziel at dawn, alone, in ground hard enough that it takes most of the morning to dig deep enough to matter. I don't have words prepared. I don't think he would have wanted them anyway. He was never a man for speeches, only for honesty, delivered without decoration, exactly when it was needed and not a moment before. I sit by the grave until the sun is fully up, the black blade planted in the dirt beside me, bindings finally loose around forearms that don't feel entirely like my own anymore. You told me to find the real answer, I say, to the grave, to the quiet, to nobody who can hear it anymore. I have it now. It isn't vengeance alone. Raziel was right about that. Vengeance ends the day Valtor dies, and ending is not what this needs to be. It's not simple justice either, not the clean kind that exists in stories, a wrong righted and a world set back to how it should have always been. It's larger than either word alone can hold. Every lord who profited from the lie. Every judge who signed away children born on the wrong night. The order that built its power hunting people like me. The throne itself, built on generations of quietly murdered heirs and a myth convenient enough that nobody ever thought to question it. I don't have the strength yet to burn all of that down. I know that as clearly as I've ever known anything, but I have the shape of what I'm building toward now. For the first time since the throne room stripped my name away, and unlike everything that's happened to me since that night, this isn't something the world is doing to me anymore. It's something I'm choosing to do to it. I stand, pull the black blade from the dirt, and look east, past the wasteland, toward a capital that doesn't know yet what it made when it threw a 14-year-old boy into the ashlands to die. It's going to find out. I stay at the grave for 3 days. I don't eat much. I don't spar. I sit, and breathe the way Raziel taught me to breathe, and let the ashlands do what they do to anyone who stops moving in them for too long. Strip away everything that isn't essential, until what's left is just the shape of a person and whatever they're actually made of underneath. What I find underneath isn't peace. It's closer to a controlled fire, banked but not out, waiting for fuel. The visions start on the second night, though I'm not sure at first whether they're visions or simply exhaustion finally catching up to grief. I close my eyes by the fire in the throne room as there instead of the dark the crowd, cheering, that old woman clapping, the man shouting about ash that should burn. I stand in the middle of it exactly as I did at 14, except now the black blade is in my hand, and some part of me, ashamed even in the dream, wants very badly to use it on all of them. I don't. Even here, even in whatever this is, I don't. The second night it's Valtor, standing on the palace steps with that one honest flash of satisfaction on his face, except in the dream he doesn't turn away, he walks closer, still smiling, and says exactly what I've imagined him saying every night since the confession. Good boy. I wake with my hand already closed around the blade's hilt before I'm even fully conscious. The third night it's Kellen, silver sigils rising around him unhurried, except this time I don't lose. This time I lose control, instead the black blade moving faster and wilder than any real fight would call for, cutting through sigils, and then, when the dream Kellen is already beaten, continuing anyway, past any reasonable point of stopping. I wake from that one shaking, and I understand, finally, what these nights have actually been showing me. Not memories. Warnings. Raziel's voice again, from the very first spar we ever had. Strength without a reason behind it doesn't serve the man carrying it. It consumes him instead. I don't want to become something that has to be stopped by someone else the way Kellen needed stopping. I decide that, clearly, on the third morning, and something in my chest loosens slightly for the first time since the cave. The marauders find me on the fourth day, while I'm still weak from 3 days of barely eating, still raw from 3 nights of visions that cost more sleep than they gave. 5 of them, opportunists who've clearly heard rumors of a lone swordsman living rough near a grave and decided grief makes for easy prey. They're wrong, but not for the reasons they'd expect. I don't draw the black blade right away. I'm too tired, honestly, to summon the full weight of the form, and for one bad moment as they close in I genuinely wonder if 3 days of mourning have left me weaker than I was the morning of the Alpha's basin. The first one swings a rusted blade at my head. I duck it out of pure old instinct, the same instinct that first got me through the ravine, before Raziel, before any of this, and my counter lands with a fist rather than a sword, more desperate improvisation than technique. He goes down anyway. Harder than 5 months ago, when a blow like that would have barely staggered a bandit half this size. I notice it in the same breath I throw it how much easier the strike came, how much less it cost me. Muscle and instinct fused now in a way they weren't even during the fight with the first Red Ravens. 5 months of training left something behind that has nothing to do with the black blade at all. The second and third come together, and this time I do draw the form, not the reckless surge from the basin, not even the controlled economy from the second Ravens fight, but something different, something that arrives without the violent wrench I've come to expect. The bindings tighten. The black blade settles into my grip. And then it changes. I feel it happen mid-motion, the same way I felt the first form arrive in the basin, except this time there's no overwhelming heat, no loss of control. The heavy black plate at my forearms thins, lightens, the cloak that hung to my knees since the basin shortening abruptly to my waist, exposing wrapped forearms that no longer need to hide beneath fabric. The blade in my hand shifts to the thick obsidian weight, thinning into something narrower, longer, built for speed rather than raw destruction. The second marauder's blow, aimed at where my shoulder should be, meets nothing but air. I'm already past him, the new blade drawing a clean line across his side before he's finished the swing he committed to. The third doesn't even manage to swing. I'm simply faster than his eyes can track, the strike landing and the follow-through already carrying me toward the fourth before the third fully understands he's been cut. It takes 4 more seconds to end all 5 of them. I know because, absurdly, some part of my mind is still counting, the same way I counted the 4 seconds it took Raziel to beat me on our first spar. This time the number means something entirely different. I stand in the aftermath, breathing steady, barely marked, looking down at forearms wrapped differently than they were an hour ago, at a blade that no longer resembles the crude weight I carried through the Red Ravens and the Inquisitor both. I don't understand it yet, not fully, but I understand enough. The first form was born from desperation, from a boy who had nothing left but raw survival. This one arrived from something else. Grief, sharpened by 5 months of discipline into something with an edge instead of just weight. Purpose, finally chosen instead of stumbled into. I think of Raziel's grave, half a mile back toward camp, and I think that if he could see this, he wouldn't smile the way he did after the basin. He'd ask what I intend to do with it. He always asked that question before he'd acknowledge any growth at all. I already know the answer this time. I knew it the morning I buried him. I return to the grave before returning to camp, and I stand there a long while with the new blade thinner, faster, humming in a different register than the first form ever did, resting point down in the dirt beside the mound. I found it, I say. The real answer. You'd have liked that it took me this long, I think. You always said anyone who finds it too quickly is usually lying to themselves. The Ashlands don't answer. They never do. But something in the silence feels less empty than it has since the 6 men came through that cave entrance in the dark. I have a name for what I'm building toward now. I have a form the world hasn't seen yet, faster and sharper than anything Volter's hunters have faced so far. I have a promise made to a dying man that I intend to keep exactly as I made it, not vengeance alone, not clean justice either, but something large enough to tear out a lie that has outlived generations of children it was never entitled to claim. I have, for the first time since the throne room, something that feels less like survival and more like a beginning. I turn from the grave and start walking, not deeper into the Ashlands this time, but toward its edge, toward the roads that lead back to everything that exiled me. The black swordsman the rumors have been describing doesn't exist anymore, not exactly. Something faster, colder, and far more deliberate has taken his place. Valtor is about to learn the difference the hard way. The roads outside the Ashlands haven't forgotten me. They just don't recognize me anymore, which turns out to be a useful kind of invisibility. A hood, a plain gray cloak over the wraps and the narrow blade, and I pass 3 separate patrols in the first 2 days without a single second glance. I don't head for the capital. Not yet. Raziel's plan, the one he never lived to fully explain, only sketch in pieces during our last real conversation, was never about walking up to Volter's gate and demanding a duel. It was about the roots. Lords who signed false testimonies. Judges who sentenced silence. The Order's network, quietly funded and quietly protected. Pull enough of it out, and the throne stands on nothing. I start with the nearest. Lord Bellamy's estate sits 2 days from the Ashlands edge, a minor holding whose only real significance is the private militia he keeps, well funded with money that traces back, according to the traitor networks Raziel used to tap for information, to bribes paid the night my father died. I don't sneak in. Fong of Reckoning doesn't need to sneak. The outer wall has 8 guards. I clear it in under a minute, moving through the narrow gate before the first man finishes shouting a warning, the thin, fast blade finding gaps in half-worn armor that a slower weapon never could. 2 more guards inside the courtyard barely manage to draw before I'm past them. Bellamy himself is found cowering behind an overturned table in his study, and it isn't the confrontation I expected. No defiance, no denial, just immediate, desperate confession the second he understands who's standing in his doorway. I didn't kill anyone, he says. I just signed what Volter's man put in front of me. Everyone did. What was I supposed to do, refuse the regent? You could have told the truth, I say. The truth doesn't pay for an estate like this, he says, and something about the honesty of that greed disgusts me more than a denial would have. I don't kill him. Raziel's voice is loud enough in my memory now that I don't need to consciously summon a justice, not vengeance alone. I take his signed confession instead, force him to write a fuller one naming every lord who took the same bribe, and leave him alive but ruined, his militia scattered, his name about to become useless the moment that confession reaches the right ears. It's not satisfying the way killing him might have been. It's better. I understand that clearly for the first time, walking away from Bellamy's estate with a list of names in my pocket that's about to grow considerably longer. The blacksmith is almost an accident. I hear about him in a market town 3 days later, a man named Oshin, arrested for forging weapons of a design associated with rebellion, which turns out to mean he made a sword too well and someone jealous reported him to curry favor with the local magistrate. He's scheduled for execution at dawn, a public spectacle meant to discourage exactly the kind of quiet resistance his skill represents. I don't plan to intervene. I plan to gather information about the magistrate, another name for Raziel's list. But standing in the crowd the morning of the execution, Watching a man who's done nothing but be good at his trade march toward a headsman's block on invented charges, something in me refuses to just watch and catalog. The execution square has 6 guards, the headsman, and the magistrate presiding from a raised platform. I have maybe 90 seconds between the moment I decide to act and the moment the axe would otherwise fall. I don't draw the black form. There's no time to summon anything. I move on raw speed alone, the narrow blade already faster than most men expect from a stranger in a market crowd, and the first 2 guards go down before the magistrate even finishes his ceremonial condemnation speech. The remaining 4 converge, and this becomes the tightest margin I've cut in weeks. 90 seconds shrinking fast, the headsman's axe already rising for a strike that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with timing. I cut through the 3rd guard, vault the platform rail, and put the narrow blade between the axe and Ashin's neck with less than a full second to spare. The crowd doesn't cheer this time. They go dead silent, the way people do when they've just watched something they don't yet have a name for. Run, I tell Ashin, cutting his bindings. He doesn't need telling twice. We clear the town together before the remaining guards regroup, and it's only once we're well clear, catching our breath in the treeline, that Ashin actually looks at me properly for the first time. You're him, he says. The black swordsman. The one Bellamy's been screaming about to anyone who'll listen. Word travels fast. Fast enough. He studies the narrow blade at my side with the specific hunger of a craftsman looking at something he desperately wants to understand. That's not a smith-forged weapon. Not fully. What is it? Complicated, I say. I like complicated, Ashin says, and something in his voice stubborn, a little too eager, already halfway to loyal before he's earned any reason to be, tells me he means it. I owe you my neck. Literally. Let me pay it back. I've forged for the crown's own armory. I know what real steel can do that yours currently can't. I don't have a plan for taking on allies. Raziel never got to finish explaining that part of the plan either. But I think of Bellamy's estate, cleared alone, and how much faster it might have gone with someone watching a second door. Fine, I say. But you follow orders, and the first time you get cold feet and run to a magistrate, I'll know. Wasn't planning on it, Ashin says, already grinning despite everything. Cursed prince or not, you just saved my neck from an axe. That buys a lot of loyalty in my book. The second recruitment isn't nearly as clean. I'm tracking a lead toward one of the order's smaller waystations, following a servant who's been passing information out of the palace itself, a woman named Ilsa, former handmaiden to my own mother, dismissed years ago under circumstances nobody at court bothered to explain. Ashin finds her name through market gossip. I find her in person, badly, in the middle of being caught. 2 order agents have her cornered in an alley behind a tavern, already accusing her of exactly what she's guilty of, blades half drawn, clearly deciding whether killing a servant quietly is worth the paperwork. I don't hesitate this time. The narrow blade clears both agents in the time it takes Ilsa to finish drawing breath for a scream that never fully leaves her throat. She stares at me, at the wrapped forearms, at the blade already sheathing itself, and instead of fear there's something sharper in her expression, calculation, fast and practical. You're the one Bellamy's confession is about, she says. The rumors weren't exaggerating. You're passing information out of the palace, I say. To who? To anyone willing to use it against Veltor, she says, without shame. I served your mother for 6 years before they threw me out for asking too many questions about your father's death. I've been waiting 5 years for someone to actually do something with what I know. What she knows turns out to be considerable court schedules, which lords are wavering in their loyalty to Veltor now that Bellamy's confession has started circulating, even details on troop movements around the capital that Raziel's list alone never could have given me. I want in, she says. Not as someone you rescue. As someone useful. I think of Raziel's warning from months ago: build a system, not just yourself, and understand, looking at her, that this is exactly the kind of peace the campaign actually needs. Ashin gives me steel and steady hands. Ilsa gives me eyes inside walls I can't yet walk through openly. Useful, I agree, keeps you alive longer than grateful does. Let's start there. She almost smiles at that. Almost. The third recruitment happens by accident, during a routine patrol skirmish that nearly goes wrong before it goes right. Ashin and I are scouting a supply route 2 weeks later when a border patrol 6 soldiers, more alert than the usual garrison troops, catches us in open ground with nowhere to retreat to. I draw Fong of Reckoning, ready to cut through them the way I've cut through every patrol since leaving the Ashlands. The soldiers scatter oddly instead of forming up, not fleeing, repositioning, and I understand why half a second too late. A seventh figure at the tree lean, young, robed, hands already weaving something that turns the ground beneath my feet briefly, disorientingly liquid. I stumble. It's the first time in months anything's broken my footing mid-fight without a physical blow behind it. Illusion, Ashin shouts, already moving to cover my exposed side. It's not real ground, it's not real ground. Don't trust your eyes. The mage, barely more than a boy himself, maybe my own age, robes marking him as an order washout rather than a full initiate given how roughly they're cut, looks almost as startled by his own working as I am. Like he didn't expect it to actually land. I close my eyes instead of fighting the illusion visually, trusting Ashin's shouted warning and the memory of the ground's real shape from a heartbeat before the working began, and Fong of Reckoning finds the nearest soldier's blade by feel rather than sight. It's clumsy. It's also enough. 2 soldiers down before the illusion fully breaks, and the remaining 4, confused by their own mages working now bleeding into their own footing, scatter badly enough that Ashin and I finish the skirmish with only minor cuts between us. The young mage doesn't run with the soldiers. He stands frozen at the tree lean, hands still raised, staring at what he's just done like it surprised him more than it surprised us. That was reckless, I tell him, blade still drawn. I know, he says. I've never actually landed a working like that outside of practice drills. I wasn't sure it would. He stops. Swallows. You're not going to kill me. Depends what you say next. I deserted the order 2 months ago, he says, fast, like he's rehearsed this exact confession for a moment he wasn't sure would come. They train us to hunt path users. I couldn't. I watched what they did to a girl who failed her final trial for refusing to hunt someone, and I ran before they could decide I needed the same lesson. I've been surviving on odd work since. That patrol found me first, forced me to help, said it'd buy my life back into good standing. Ashin looks at me, silent, letting me decide. Name, I say. Ren, the mage says. You want back in with the order, Ren. This is your only chance to walk away clean, I say. You want something else, you fight beside us, and the first time your nerve breaks at the wrong moment, it costs someone else their life instead of just yours. Ren looks at the 2 fallen soldiers, at Ashin's steady presence, at the narrow blade still drawn in my hand, and then, slowly, at his own hands, like he's reconsidering what they're actually capable of now that they've done something other than flee. I want something else, he says. That night, camped well off the road, the 3 of us share a fire for the first time. Ashin already needling Ren about the clumsiness of the illusion working, Ren defensive and a little too proud once he realizes the teasing isn't actually hostile, Ilsa watching both of them with the dry, appraising patience of someone who's managed younger men her whole career and finds this particular pair mildly exhausting. It's not much. A blacksmith with something to prove, a spy with old grudges finally given purpose, a deserter mage still flinching at his own power. But sitting there, watching Ashin steal the last of the bread before Ren can claim it and Ilsa roll her eyes at both of them without heat, I feel something I haven't felt since the cave with Raziel, since long before that, really, since before the throne room stripped away every person who might have once sat around a fire with me without fear in their eyes. It isn't family. Not yet. But it's the first shape of something that could, eventually, become worth protecting as much as the cause itself. Raziel built me into a weapon. I understand now, watching the 3 of them argue amiably over a fire in the dark, that the next part of his plan was never meant to be fought alone. I have a list of names in my pocket, growing longer every week. I have a blade fast enough to clear a room before most men finish drawing theirs. And now, for the first time, I have people beside me who chose to stay once they'd seen exactly what I am. Valtor is about to discover that the boy he exiled to die quietly in the Ashlands came back building something he never accounted for. Valtor stops sending mercenaries after Bellamy's confession starts circulating through the lesser nobility like a fever. Ilsa brings the news back from the capital herself, tense in a way I haven't seen from her before. He's sending Corius, she says. Personally. Commander of the Royal Guard. The regent doesn't trust anyone else with this anymore. Ashin, sharpening a blade he doesn't currently need sharpened, goes still. Corius doesn't lose, he says. I forged for the Royal Armory 2 years, back before all this. Saw him spar exhibition matches. Full battle mage armor, enchanted plate that shrugs off anything short of siege weaponry. Man's never been beaten in single combat, not once, not by anyone. Everyone's beaten eventually, Ren says. Not everyone gets a second try to prove it, Ashin says. We scout his approach for 3 days before he arrives, and even the scouting costs us. His personal guard 12 men, disciplined, nothing like the rabble the Red Ravens threw at me patrol a perimeter tight enough that Ilsa nearly gets made on the second night, only Ren's illusion work covering her retreat in time. They're not looking for a spy, Ilsa reports afterward, still catching her breath. They're looking for you specifically. Corius has briefed them on the Black Blade, the raps, all of it. He's not treating this like hunting a rumor. He's treating it like preparing for a real battle. That's the first piece of real intelligence that matters. Corius respects what I am, at least enough to prepare for it properly. The Red Ravens underestimated me. Kellen underestimated how far along the path I'd already come. Corius, it seems, isn't planning to make either mistake. I make my own mistake 3 days later, and it nearly costs everything. I've grown used to being the answer to most fights alone, Fong of reckoning fast enough, precise enough, that a direct approach has worked more often than not since leaving the Ashlands. So when Corius makes camp in an open field 2 days from the capital, confident enough in his own strength to barely fortify the position, I decide a direct strike before his forces fully settle might end this in a single decisive stroke. Ashen argues against it. I don't listen closely enough. I go alone, at dusk, moving through the loose perimeter with the same speed that's cleared every patrol since Bellamy's estate, and I make it all the way to Corius's own tent before anything goes wrong, which turns out to be exactly the problem. He was waiting. He steps out to meet me in full battle plate, enchanted metal catching the last light in a way that makes the armor look less like protection and more like something alive, humming faintly the way Fong of Reckoning hums when the form is drawn. The Black Swordsman, he says. Not a question, not even particularly impressed. You walk into an armed camp alone expecting what, exactly? An ending, I say. There's one coming, he agrees. Not the one you're imagining. I draw the narrow blade and go for the fastest opening I can find, a gap at his throat where the plate's articulation should be weakest. Fong of Reckoning connects cleanly. It doesn't cut. The enchanted metal simply absorbs the strike, a dull concussive shock running back up my arm hard enough to nearly numb it, and Corius's counterswing catches my ribs with the flat of a warhammer-sized weapon that sends me skidding across open ground before I even register being hit. I get up. I try twice more, aiming for joints, for the visor slit, for anywhere the armor's coverage might theoretically thin. Nothing lands cleanly. Every strike either glances off enchanted plate or gets read and intercepted before it fully commits, and I understand, with rising panic, that Ashen was right and I should have listened. Corius doesn't even seem to be exerting himself. That's the worst part. He's fighting the way Raziel used to fight me in our earliest spars, patient, unbothered, waiting for the moment I exhaust myself against a defense I can't currently solve. I retreat before it becomes a fourth exchange I can't survive. He lets me, which is somehow more humiliating than if he'd pursued. Come back when you found the actual answer, he calls after me, not even raising his voice. This one was never it. I make it back to camp bruised, furious at myself, and Ashen doesn't say I told you so, which somehow makes it worse. The plate's enchanted, I say, once I've caught my breath enough to explain. Nothing I threw touched it. Not the joints, not the visor, nothing. Ashen goes quiet, thinking, the specific stillness he gets when a problem is actually engaging the parts of his mind that used to forge weapons for the very armory that likely built Corius's armor. Enchanted plate that thorough doesn't come cheap, he finally says. And it's not eternal. Enchantments like that need renewal, a focus point, usually worked into the armor somewhere less obvious than the joints everyone tries first. Give me a night. I might remember something useful from my old commissions. He spends the night sketching from memory, muttering half to himself, and by dawn he has something. There, he says, jabbing a finger at a rough diagram of a standard royal cuirass. Base of the spine, under the third plate segment. That's where the enchantment's anchor sits on every commission I ever saw come through that armory. It's covered, sure, but it's also thinner than everywhere else, because the smiths need to be able to access it for renewal work. Hit that exactly right, the whole enchantment destabilizes. Won't break the armor outright. But it'll stop absorbing hits the way it did last night. You're certain, I say. I'm certain it was true 2 years ago, Ashen says. Only one way to find out if it still is. The plan Ilsa builds around Ashen's intelligence isn't subtle, but it doesn't need to be, it needs to be precise. Ren's illusion work draws Corius's perimeter guard into a chase after a decoy that isn't there, buying us the gap we need to approach the camp properly instead of alone and reckless. Ashen and Ilsa strike the camp's flank together, drawing off enough of the personal guard that Corius himself is forced to choose between defending his men or coming to meet me directly. He chooses to meet me. I was gambling that his pride would demand it, after last time, and the gamble pays off. Back again, he says, stepping clear of the camp, plate already gleaming in the pre-dawn light. Somehow I doubt you found a better answer overnight. I did, I say. I just need you to swing first. He obliges. The Warhammer-sized weapon comes down in an arc I've studied exactly once, badly, 3 nights ago, but once was enough to understand its rhythm, and this time I don't try to meet it or block it. I let it pass, stepping inside the swing's full extension where his own armor's bulk works against him for the first time, momentum carrying the weapon past where it can recover quickly. The opening lasts less than a second. Fong of Reckoning finds the base of his spine exactly where Ashen's memory placed it, the thin seam beneath the third plate segment, and the strike that couldn't touch him last night this time meets something that gives. The enchantment doesn't shatter dramatically. It simply fails, a visible ripple running through the armor's surface, the faint hum I noticed at dusk cutting out entirely, and Corius's next swing, still fast, still trained by decades of genuine skill, connects with a body that no longer has magic quietly absorbing the cost of every mistake. He feels it immediately. I watch the realization cross what little of his face is visible through the visor slit, and for the first time since this fight began, something like actual concern replaces his earlier, unbothered patience. Clever, he says, and means it as something closer to respect than insult. The fight that follows is the hardest single combat I've had since the Ashlands. Corius, even without the enchantment's protection, is still a decorated master of his craft, decades of real skill behind every strike, and I take wounds in the exchange that will scar a gash across my forearm that barely misses tendon, a blow to the same shoulder Kellen's sigils damaged months ago that leaves it half-numb by the fight's end. But without the armor's absorption, my speed finally matters the way it should. Every strike I land now actually costs him something, and unlike Kellen, unlike the Red Ravens, Corius doesn't have a second layer of advantage waiting once the first one fails. The end comes fast once it turns. I press the advantage the way 2 weeks of control training after the first Red Ravens fight taught me to, not wildly, not wastefully, precise strikes that compound rather than exhaust in Corius, bleeding now from wounds the armor should have prevented, finally goes down to a strike aimed exactly where Ashen's intelligence said the enchantment's failure would leave him most exposed. He doesn't die instantly. He has a moment, on the ground, plate cracked and dark with blood, to look up at me with something that isn't quite hatred. The Regent lied to us, he says, voice fading. Told the guard you murdered your father in cold blood. I believed him. Followed orders my whole career on the strength of believing men like him told the truth. He didn't, I say. You can still choose what you do with that, if you live. Won't, he says, with the flat certainty of a man who's assessed his own wound honestly. Tell whoever's left that still remembers me I served what I thought was justice. Turns out I only ever served him. He doesn't say anything else. I don't know if the confession changes anything about what he did in Volter's name over the years. I only know it matters that he said it, that the doubt Bellamy's confession started is spreading even into the parts of the crown that seemed most solid. Ashen finds me afterward, favoring one side badly, a blow taken covering Ilsa's flank during the distraction that's left 2 ribs cracked, though he insists, unconvincingly, that it's nothing. It's not nothing, Ilsa says, already working to bind it properly. You could barely stand when we regrouped. Could barely stand and still didn't drop the shield line, Ashen says, wincing through what's clearly real pain dressed up as bravado. Call that a win. Ren, unharmed but pale from the strain of sustaining the illusion long enough to matter, sits a little apart, staring at his own hands the way he did the first night we met him, like he's still surprised, every single time, that they're capable of contributing something real. I look at the 3 of them, Ashen cracked but upright, Ilsa steady as ever beneath a thin layer of worry she won't fully show, Ren quietly proud of a working that actually held under real pressure and understands something Raziel tried to tell me back in the cave, months before any of them existed in my life. I didn't win this fight alone. I couldn't have. Corius's armor doesn't fail without Ashen's memory. His attention doesn't split without Ren's illusion and Ilsa's flank. The precision that finally found the opening doesn't exist without the 2 weeks of control Raziel drilled into me after the first Red Ravens fight nearly killed me from recklessness. This is what building something means. Not becoming strong enough to solve every problem alone. Becoming the center of something that solves problems together. Corius is dead, I tell them, Once Ashen's ribs are properly bound and we're moving again, putting distance between ourselves and the wreckage of his camp before reinforcements can arrive. Valtor just lost the best sword he had left. What's next? Ilsa asks. I think of the list in my pocket, considerably shorter now than it was, and the names still remaining on it, each one a thread that leads eventually, inevitably, back to the throne room where all of this started. Next, I say, we make sure the whole country hears exactly why he lost him. Corius's death changes the shape of everything, faster than I expect. Ilsa's contacts inside the palace report whispers spreading through the lesser court almost immediately, not sympathy for Valtor's loss, but questions. If the Black Swordsman is only a cursed murderer, why does he leave confessions instead of corpses? Why does the crown's own commander die admitting doubt? You're winning something you didn't plan to win, Ilsa tells me, one evening at camp, going through the latest reports by firelight. Not just battles. The story itself is starting to slip out of Valtor's control. He won't let that continue, Ren says. He's right. Within the week, Valtor's answer arrives, and it isn't another soldier. Her name reaches us before she does. Mira Vesa, twin sister to the Inquisitor Kellen I fought and lost 2 months ago, though where he wielded seals and structure, rumor describes her differently. Blood magic. The ability, whispered about in the same breath as her name, to read violence before it happens, to know a blade's path before the arm behind it fully commits. Kellen's sister, Ashen says, still favoring his healing ribs but well enough now to argue tactics by the fire. If half of what people say is true, she's the reason he became an Inquisitor in the first place. Apparently she was always the more dangerous of the two. Comforting, I say. Wasn't meant to be. She doesn't send scouts or soldiers ahead of her. She comes alone, on foot, unhurried, finding our camp with an ease that unsettles Ilsa more than any tracking skill should. Blood remembers where blood has been spilled, Mira says, by way of explanation, when I ask how she found us so easily. She's younger than I expected, sharp-featured, dressed simply, nothing like Kellen's ceremonial robes. You've spilled quite a lot of it these past months. You're not hard to follow if you know how to listen for it. You're here to kill me. I'm here to see if my brother exaggerated, she says. He rarely does. That's usually a bad sign for you. We don't fight that first night. She simply watches, from a distance, unbothered by Ashen's blade or Ren's readied working, and leaves before dawn without a word. That was a test, Ilsa says, once she's gone. She wanted to see how we'd respond. What we'd do under observation. What did we tell her? Ren asks. Too much, probably, Ilsa admits. The real confrontation comes 4 days later. On ground Mira chooses deliberately an open, dry riverbed with clear sightlines in every direction, nowhere for Ren's illusions to hide effectively, nowhere for Ashen and Ilsa to flank unseen the way they did against Corius. She's controlling the terrain before the fight even starts, Ashen says, surveying the riverbed with obvious unease. That's not an accident. It isn't. The moment I step onto the open ground alone, the plan, again, being to draw her attention while the others position at the riverbed's edges. Mira is already waiting at its center, entirely unhurried, like she's been expecting this exact configuration for days. Alone first, she says. Let's see what my brother actually saw, before your friends complicate things. I draw Fong of Reckoning and go for the opening strike I've used successfully more times than I can count since the form first steadied fast, precise, aimed for a gap at her shoulder that would end most fights in a single exchange. She isn't there when the blade arrives. She's already a full step to the side, unhurried, like she watched the strike form in my mind before my arm ever moved. There it is, she says. Exactly what he described. Fast. Well-trained. Utterly readable. I try again, faster, less telegraphed. She reads that too, a half step ahead every single time, and I understand within the first minute that this isn't a fight I can win through speed or precision alone. Every strike I commit to, she's already answered before I've finished committing to it. She doesn't retaliate immediately. She simply lets me exhaust options, one after another, each attempt met with the same unhurried evasion, until frustration starts eroding the discipline Raziel spent months building into me. Your teacher taught you control, she says, still circling, still entirely calm. He didn't teach you what to do against someone who already knows where control leads. Predictability is its own kind of weakness, once someone learns to read it. The first real wound comes when I finally overcommit out of frustration, exactly the mistake she's clearly been waiting for, a wide, powerful strike that she doesn't dodge this time but redirects, blood magic flaring dark red along her forearm as she catches the blades flat and turns my own momentum back against me. I hit the dry riverbed hard, and her counter-strike opens a line across my chest before I've fully recovered my footing. It's shallow, but it's a message. She's been playing with me, and the real fight hasn't started. Now, I manage, loud enough to carry, and the plan Ilsa built around exactly this moment finally activates. Ren's illusion working doesn't try to hide anyone. Myra's already proven she reads intention, not just position, and hiding wouldn't survive contact with whatever her magic actually does. Instead, Ren does something riskier. He creates 3 additional illusory versions of me, each moving with slightly different, deliberately randomized patterns, flooding whatever she's reading with false intentions to sort through alongside the real one. Myra's calm falters for the first time. I see it happen. A half second of genuine confusion as 4 versions of the same threat suddenly demand her attention at once, her magic clearly built to read one clear violence at a time rather than 4 conflicting ones. I don't waste the opening. I close the distance while she's still sorting real from illusory, and for the first time in the fight, my strike lands clean, not fatal, but real, cutting across her side deep enough that the unhurried composure finally cracks into something like genuine alarm. Clever, she says, echoing Corius's word for Ashen's discovery, though her voice carries less respect and more anger now. Cheating, some might call it. Adapting, I say. You said it yourself. Predictability's a weakness. So is assuming I'd only bring one. She goes all in after that, blood magic flaring fully now, dark lines spreading up both arms as she abandons subtlety for raw, desperate power. The same shift I recognize from my own fight with the Alpha, from Corius once his armor failed him, the moment a losing combatant stops calculating and starts simply trying to survive through force. It makes her faster, stronger, genuinely dangerous in a way the earlier, calculated Mira wasn't. She catches Ren's 4th illusion attempt and burns through it entirely, magic straining visibly now, and turns on him directly, the first time since the fight began that she's targeted anyone other than me. Ashen intercepts. It costs him her strike, redirected mid-swing, opens a gash along his forearm that will need real stitching later, but it buys the half-second Ilsa needs to close from the flank, a thrown blade catching Myra's exposed side exactly where I'd already wounded her minutes before. The combination, my strike, Ashen's interception, Ilsa's thrown blade landing on already damaged ground, finally does what none of us could have managed alone. Mira staggers, the dark blood magic flickering unstably along her arms, control slipping visibly for the first time since she arrived at our camp 4 nights ago. I close the last distance while she's still recovering, Fong of Reckoning already drawn back for a strike that doesn't need to be clever this time, only decisive. She reads it. Of course she reads it, that hasn't changed. But reading it and having the strength left to answer it are 2 different problems, and for the first time in the entire fight, she doesn't have enough of the second to matter. She doesn't die. I pull the strike at the last possible instant, some instinct, Raziel's voice, maybe, or simply the memory of the messenger I let run after burying him, refusing to let this become an execution rather than a victory. The blade opens a wound serious enough to end the fight decisively without ending her life outright. Mira collapses to one knee, blood magic guttering out entirely, breathing hard, staring up at me with an expression that's finally shed every trace of the unhurried composure she arrived with. You should have finished it, she says. Probably, I agree. I'm told I'm still working on the difference between vengeance and something better. Today you get the benefit of that. She doesn't thank me. I didn't expect her to. But something shifts in her expression anyway, calculation returning even through the pain, the same sharp intelligence that read every one of my attacks now turning toward a different kind of assessment entirely. My brother will hear about this, she says. So will the regent. Neither of them will like what it means. Good, I say. Let them worry. She retreats the way she arrived, alone, on foot, refusing help from any of us despite the wound, and disappears back toward the capital before we can decide whether stopping her is even worth the effort. We make camp that night, battered in ways none of the previous fights quite managed. Ashen's forearm needs real stitching, done badly by firelight, with Ilsa's unsteady hands standing in for a proper healer. Ren sits apart again, exhausted past speech, having sustained 4 simultaneous illusions longer than he's ever attempted before. I have a shallow line across my chest that stings every time I breathe too deeply. That was too close, Ilsa says, finally breaking the silence once Ashen's arm is bound. She read everything. If Ren hadn't found a way to break that, I almost didn't, Ren admits, voice hoarse. 4 at once. I didn't know I could hold that many. You did, I say. That's what matters. I think, staring into the fire, of what Mira said before she left. My brother will hear about this, so will the regent, and understand we've crossed some threshold tonight that goes beyond simply winning another fight. Kellen beat me once, decisively, and I nearly died learning the lesson. His sister, arguably more dangerous by every account, couldn't finish what he started. Veltor is running out of individual champions to send. Word of tonight will reach the capital fast, added to Bellamy's confession, to Corius's dying doubt, to every rumor already circulating about a black swordsman who leaves the guilty exposed rather than simply dead. The court is starting to ask the question out loud now, according to Ilsa's contacts, not whispered in corners anymore, but spoken openly enough that Veltor can't fully suppress it. Who actually killed the king? I don't know yet how close that question is to reaching an answer none of us can fully control. I only know, watching my small, battered, exhausted circle of allies settle in around a fire that's kept us alive through 4 fights now, that whatever Veltor sends next, it won't find us facing it as separate, isolated threats anymore. It'll find us as something he never planned for when he threw a 14-year-old boy into the ashlands to disappear quietly. It'll find us as a system that survived him underestimating it, every single time. Volter's answer to Myra's failure doesn't come as another champion. It comes as a message, delivered by a frightened courier who finds our camp somehow despite every precaution Ilsa's built into our movements these past weeks. The letter is short. It doesn't need to be long. Your mother and sister are guests of the crown now. Come to the old watchtower at Greymark Pass alone, or their hospitality ends. You have 3 days. I read it twice before the words fully land. Then a third time, hoping they'll rearrange into something less final. He wouldn't dare, Ilsa says, though her voice doesn't carry conviction. Not after Bellamy, after Corius, after Mira. The court's already turning on him. Harming them now, he's cornered, I say. Cornered men do the thing that used to be unthinkable. I don't sleep that night. I sit with the letter, with the memory of my sister reaching for me through a guard's outstretched arm 5 years ago, with the promise I made a dying man in a cave, not vengeance alone, not clean justice, something larger, and I understand, clearly, that everything since the throne room has been leading toward exactly this choice. We go, I say, at dawn, to the 3 faces around the fire. All of us. It's a trap. We know it's a trap. We go anyway. Then we go prepared, Ashen says, already checking his blade. Not walking in blind like Corius's camp. Ren nods, quiet, resolved in a way I haven't fully seen from him before. Ilsa says nothing at all, just starts packing with the efficient speed of someone who's already decided the answer before I finished asking the question. Greymark Pass sits 2 days hard travel from our camp, a narrow defile between cliff faces old enough that the watchtower guarding it has stood since before Ardwile was a kingdom worth naming. We arrive on the morning of the 3rd day, exactly on schedule, exactly as expected. It's a trap in the most literal sense possible. The moment we clear the pass's mouth, black-clad figures emerge from concealment on both cliff faces and from the tower itself, a full company, at least 30 strong, and at their center, unmistakable even at this distance, a smaller cluster wearing the specific, unadorned dark gray of an elite unit rather than common soldiers. Midnight Blades, Ilsa says, voice tight. I've heard of them. Trained specifically to counter path users. Volter's been building them for years, apparently. In case someone like you ever happened. How many? Reports say a dozen. Maybe fewer now, maybe more. I count 11 distinct figures in the gray formation. 11, trained specifically to kill someone exactly like me, standing between us and whatever's happening to my mother and sister inside that tower. Where are they? I call out, to no one in particular, to all of them. A figure steps forward from the tower entrance, not Veltor himself, I note, with something between relief and disappointment, but a captain wearing his colors. Alive, the captain says. For now. That depends entirely on what happens in the next few minutes. The first wave comes fast, and it isn't the Midnight Blades, it's the common soldiers, 30 strong, sent first to wear us down before the specialists engage. Ashen and Ilsa move to meet them at the pass's narrowest point, where numbers matter less than positioning, while Ren works to fracture their coordination with illusions layered faster and more precisely than I've ever seen him manage. I push toward the tower directly. The plan, such as it is, was never subtle. Reach my mother and sister before the Midnight Blades fully commit, extract them, worry about the rest afterward. It doesn't survive contact with the actual fight. I hear Ashin go down before I see it happen, not dead, not yet, but a sound of pain sharp enough to cut through the general noise of combat, and when I glance back he's on one knee, favoring the same forearm Mira wounded weeks ago, 3 soldiers closing on him at once while Ilsa fights desperately to reach his side through a line that's suddenly, badly, breaking. I don't reach them in time to prevent what happens next. I reach them in time to see it. Ilsa gets to him. She stands over him, blade in each hand now, buying the seconds his body needs to find its feet again, and a soldier's blade, thrown rather than swung, finds the gap between her ribs that a lifetime of careful information gathering never trained her to fully guard against. She doesn't fall immediately. She finishes the exchange first, dropping the soldier who threw it, some final reserve of will keeping her upright long enough to make sure Ashin actually gets clear. Then she goes down, and doesn't get back up. I don't have time to grieve. That's the specific cruelty of this fight. The moment demands I keep moving, keep fighting, and grief has to wait for a stillness the battle refuses to provide. The Midnight Blades finally engage as I close on the tower, and everything I've learned since the Ashlands proves immediately, brutally insufficient. They don't fight like Corius, relying on armor. They don't fight like Mira, relying on foresight. They fight like people who've spent years studying exactly how path users move, drilled specifically to counter the rhythms Raziel spent months building into me. My openings, the ones that worked against everyone else, simply aren't openings against them, they're already there, blades meeting mine before I've finished committing, 3 of them working in coordinated rotation that leaves no gap long enough to exploit. Fong of Reckoning's speed, so reliable until now, earns me nothing but a growing collection of wounds. A blade opens my side. Another catches my thigh. I'm bleeding from 4 places within the first minute, exactly the kind of accumulating damage that ended so many fights against me in my earliest weeks in the Ashlands, except now the stakes standing behind this loss are everything I have left. Ren reaches me, breathless, having finally broken away from the soldiers below. Illusions aren't working, he gasps. They're not tracking me visually. I don't know how, but they're not fooled. Trained against exactly this, I say, parrying a strike that nearly takes my hand. Fall back. Help Ashin. I'm not leaving you, Ren. He hesitates one more second, then goes, and I understand, watching him retreat toward where Ashin's still fighting to protect Ilsa's body from further violation, that I'm alone against 11 men built specifically to kill me, with my mother and sister still somewhere inside that tower, and every technique Raziel ever taught me currently failing against opponents who studied his exact style to counter it. I go down twice in the next exchange. The first time, I recover fast enough to avoid a killing blow by inches. The second time, a Midnight Blade strike catches my shoulder hard enough that Fong of Reckoning nearly falls from my grip entirely, and I hit the ground with 4 of them closing in a tight, professional formation that leaves no gap at all. I think, in the strange clarity that precedes what feels like certain death, of Ilsa going down protecting Ashin. Of Raziel's grave. Of my sister's hand reaching through a guard's arm 5 years ago, and how close I am, right now, to failing to reach her again. That thought doesn't paralyze me. It does something else. Something underneath the grief and the pain and the mounting wounds simply refuses the ending currently forming around me. Not the reckless fury that took the basin, not the sharpened purpose that took the marauders after Raziel's grave, something larger than either, built from every loss stacked on top of every other loss until the weight of it stops being something I carry and becomes something that moves through me instead. I don't decide to change. I simply stop being able to accept the shape of this fight as it currently stands, and something answers that refusal. The transformation doesn't feel like the previous 2. There's no gradual settling, no controlled arrival. It's immediate and total. The ragged remains of my cloak dissolve entirely, replaced by something that isn't fabric at all, plate assembling itself from crystallized ash energy across my chest and shoulders like the physical shape of everything I've survived finally given form. The wraps on my forearms ignite with lines of pale light, runes I've never seen before tracing themselves across bindings that no longer look like cloth at all. Fong of Reckoning changes a 3rd time, the narrow blade dissolving into something without fixed shape, light and dark ash swirling where steel used to be, lengthening and reshaping itself according to some will I'm only barely aware of directing. The 4 Midnight Blades closing on me hesitate. It's the first hesitation I've seen from any of them since the fight began. It's also the last mistake they make. I don't remember the next several seconds with full clarity, not from injury, but from the strange, overwhelming totality of the form itself, speed and power arriving simultaneously in a way that outpaces my own ability to consciously track it. I understand only the aftermath, for midnight blades down, the fight's momentum entirely reversed, and my body already moving toward the remaining 7 before I've fully processed what happened to the first 4. They adapt faster than the common soldiers below did. They're skilled enough to recognize immediately that whatever I'd become invalidates the specific counters they trained against, and skilled enough, still, to nearly compensate, coordinating a retreat toward more defensible ground rather than continuing to press an advantage that no longer exists. I don't let them retreat cleanly. Whatever this form is, it doesn't move like the previous 2, faster than Fang of Reckoning's speed, stronger than the first form's raw power. Both qualities present simultaneously rather than traded against each other the way every previous form demanded. The remaining midnight blades fall in the next exchange, one after another, until the pass around the tower's base goes quiet except for my own breathing, ragged, and the low, resonant hum of runes still tracing light across my forearms. I don't stop to process what's happened. I turn toward the tower, and what's left of the captain's forces, the ones who haven't already fled from the sound of 11 trained killers falling in under a minute, scatter rather than stand between me and the entrance. Inside, my mother and sister are exactly where the letter promised, bound but unharmed, guarded by only 2 soldiers who drop their weapons the instant I clear the doorway, the crystallized ashplate and pale runes apparently more convincing an argument than anything I could have said. My sister, 14 now, the same age I was the night everything started, looks at me with an expression that takes a moment to resolve into recognition, the years and the wounds and the transformed armor making me nearly unrecognizable as the brother she last saw dragged away by 6 guards. Cashin? She says, uncertain. It's me, I say, and my voice, still rough from the form's aftermath, doesn't sound entirely like it used to either. My mother doesn't ask questions. She simply reaches for me the way my sister once tried to and couldn't, and for one brief moment, cutting her bindings, I let myself feel something other than the battle still echoing through my body, relief, small and fierce and entirely out of place in the middle of a battlefield still smoking behind me. It doesn't last. It can't, not yet. But it's there, real, the first true thing I've held on to since Raziel's grave. Outside, Ren and a badly wounded Ashen make their way up from the pass, the remaining common soldiers having broken and fled once word of the Midnight Blade's defeat spread through their ranks. Ashen's leaning heavily on Ren, blood loss evident in how unsteady his steps have become, but he's alive, and for a moment that's enough to hold on to alongside my mother and sister's survival. Then I see Ilsa's body, laid carefully aside where Ashen and Ren clearly moved her rather than leave her where she fell, and the small, fierce relief from a moment ago collapses under something heavier. I kneel beside her. I don't have words prepared, the same as I didn't have words prepared for Raziel's grave, and I understand, looking at her still, careful face, that this is the second person who chose to stay beside me and paid for that choice with everything they had. She held the line, Ashen says quietly, lowering himself down beside me despite the pain it clearly costs him. Bought me the seconds I needed. Never even hesitated. I know, I say. We sit with her a long while, the 4 of us who remain, my mother and sister added now to a circle that's already lost 1 member today and nearly lost 2 more, and the ashplate and pale runes finally begin to fade from my forearms as whatever fueled their arrival settles, spent, into something quieter. I understand, kneeling there, that the form Raziel warned me about all those months ago, this is not a gift, has finally shown me exactly what he meant. It came from loss, total and undeniable, and it cost exactly what it should have cost to earn, everything I had left to give in that single, desperate moment. I look toward the capital, visible as a smudge of distant smoke and stone beyond the pass, and understand that whatever's left of Volter's power, whatever champions or soldiers or lies still stand between here and the ending Raziel asked me to build toward, none of it will survive what I've just become. It's not triumph I feel, looking at that horizon. It's something closer to inevitability. Volter's reckoning has stopped being a question of if. It arrives next. We bury Ilsa 2 days later, in ground softer than the ashlands ever offered Raziel, my mother and sister standing beside the rest of us because she'd have wanted witnesses who understood exactly what she gave. Ashen says the words this time, rough with grief and healing wounds both. I don't have anything to add. I've learned by now that some losses don't need my voice added to them. Then we move on the capital. The city gates barely slow us down. Word of Greymark Pass has outraced our travel, and most of the common guard step aside rather than test whether the rumors exaggerate. The ones who don't learn quickly that they don't, I clear the detachment in the time it takes Ashen to dismount, Fang of Reckoning faster and more economical than it's ever been. I think, briefly, of the boy who couldn't make a proper fist, of 4-second sparring losses, of someone so distant now he feels like another person's memory. Something you'd like to say? Ashen asks, watching me pause over the fallen guards. Just noticing how far it's come, I say, and keep moving. The palace steps hold the last of the Midnight Blade's 6 survivors from Greymark Pass, reinforced by what remains of the loyal royal guard. They form up disciplined, desperate, understanding exactly what happened to their comrades and choosing to stand anyway. I don't draw the absolute form. Fong of Reckoning is enough. The narrow blade's speed, refined through Red Ravens in Corius and Mira, clears the steps in a fight that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago and feels, now, almost inevitable. The Midnight Blades fall hardest, trained specifically against exactly what I am. But 6 is not 11, and I am not the exhausted, cornered fighter who nearly died reaching that tower. All 6 go down, none dead by my final choice, bound instead for whatever justice the coming hours actually mean. The throne room hasn't changed since the night my father died. That's the first thing I notice, stepping through doors I haven't crossed since guards dragged me out of them at 14. The same tapestries, the same high windows, the same throne where a sword I recognized far too well once ended a king's life. Valtor is there, along with what remains of the court, brave enough or trapped enough to still be present. My brother Rowan on the throne itself, thinner and more hollow-eyed than I remember, clearly the marionette Raziel once predicted he'd become. Edric stands near the wall, and I notice, distantly, that neither brother looks surprised to see me. Only afraid. Cashin, Valtor says, and for the first time since the confession, since the throne room, since everything, his composure has genuine cracks running through it. You've caused considerable damage to the crown's holdings this past year. You've caused considerably more, I say. I'm just the first to make you answer for it. I don't fight him immediately. Raziel's plan was never simply about ending Valtor, it was about ending the lie that let men like him operate unquestioned for generations. Ashen steps forward with the evidence: Bellamy's confession, the fuller list gathered since, records of bribes that Ilsa spent weeks compiling before Greymark Pass took her. Ren adds his own account of how the Order served the throne's convenience rather than any real justice. I add the truth Raziel gave me with his dying breath, that the Blood Moon prophecy is a generations-old story, built to justify removing gifted children who might one day challenge a throne resting on manufactured fear. The court listens in a silence that shifts, gradually, from disbelief to something closer to horrified recognition, the specific quiet of people realizing a lie they participated in was always exactly what they feared it might be. Lies, Valtor says, but the word comes out weaker than he clearly intends it to. Fabrications from a boy who murdered his own father and has spent a year trying to rewrite the story to suit himself. Then explain the sword, I say. The one you handed the guards to plant in my hand. Explain why the servants who testified against me have never been seen at court since, the same week you promoted 3 of their relatives to positions they weren't qualified for. Rowan, on the throne, goes very still. I watch something shift in his face, not the sudden clarity of a man discovering the truth for the first time, but the slower, worse recognition of a man who's suspected it for years and simply never had the courage or the reason to act on the suspicion. Uncle, Rowan says, quiet, the first thing he's said since I entered. Is it true? Valtor doesn't answer. That, more than anything Ashen's evidence or my own testimony could accomplish, is the answer the entire court needed. He draws on the dark magic, then not composure breaking into confession, but composure breaking into something far more dangerous. I've heard rumors of it since Greymark Pass, whispers of a forbidden working tied to the throne itself, a last resort reserved for exactly the kind of cornered desperation Valtor now embodies completely. The transformation isn't like anything I've fought before. Dark energy, wrong in a way that makes even the air in the throne room feel heavier, wraps around him in coiling lines that seem to draw strength from the room itself, from the throne, from generations of accumulated power that were never meant to be spent all at once. You want justice, Valtor says, voice layered now with something that isn't entirely his own. Let's see if you can survive long enough to deliver it. The fight that follows is the hardest of my life, and it happens in phases. The first is pure force. Valtor, empowered by the throne's dark magic, hits harder than anything I've faced except the absolute form's own arrival at Greymark Pass, and I meet it the only way that makes sense, the raw obsidian weight of the original form, trading power for power in a throne room that starts to genuinely crack under the exchange. It isn't enough alone. Valtor shifts to something faster, more erratic, the dark magic unstable in a way that makes his attacks difficult to predict even for someone who's learned to read intention the hard way against Mira. I shift with him, Fong of Reckoning answering speed with speed, and for a long, brutal stretch neither of us gains real ground, both bleeding from wounds that would have ended lesser fighters minutes ago. The turn comes when Valtor, sensing the stalemate isn't breaking in his favor, does exactly what a cornered man does, he abandons any remaining restraint entirely. Rowan, he shouts, mid-fight, dark magic flaring around one raised hand. Order the guards to intervene, or I bring this entire hall down with all of us in it. I understand, in that moment, that he's no longer fighting to win. He's fighting to make sure that if he loses, he takes everything down with him: the throne room, the court, my brothers, everyone who's finally started to see him clearly. I don't have time to calculate a clever answer. I only have the truth Raziel spent months building into me, and the promise I made him in a cave that feels, now, like it happened a lifetime ago. Not vengeance alone. Not clean justice, either. Something large enough to actually end this. The absolute form arrives without the desperate, loss-fueled edge that brought it into being at Greymark Pass. This time it comes on purpose, deliberate, drawn the way Raziel first taught me to draw the very first form all those months ago, not summoned in crisis, but chosen. The crystallized ash plate assembles across my chest and shoulders. The runes ignite along my forearms, steady this time rather than overwhelming. Fog of reckoning dissolves into the shapeless, shifting blade of pale and dark ash, and for the first time, I understand what Raziel meant by the path being a door rather than a gift. I'm not being carried by the form's power. I'm directing it, fully, completely, the way a conductor directs music rather than simply being swept along by it. Volter's dark magic, unstable and desperate, needs something that no longer needs to trade force for force or speed for speed. I move through his attacks the way water moves around stone, drawing on the raw power of the first form when the moment calls for it, the speed of the second when it doesn't, both simultaneously present rather than sequentially chosen, exactly the synthesis Raziel spent an entire year building toward without ever living to see it completed. The dark magic finally fails him 3 exchanges later, unable to sustain itself against a fight it can no longer predict or overpower. Valtor goes down, the coiling black energy guttering out around him, leaving him exactly what he's always actually been underneath the borrowed power and the decades of careful manipulation, an old man, alone, out of tricks. I don't kill him. I understand, standing over him with the absolute form's blade resting inches from his throat, that this is the choice Raziel's entire teaching was actually preparing me to make, not whether I could end this, but what kind of ending I actually wanted to build. Confess, I say. In front of all of them. The way you made me confess to something I never did. Valtor looks up at me, beaten in every way that matters, and for one long moment I think he might actually refuse, might choose to die rather than admit it aloud. Then something in him breaks entirely, not dramatic, not theatrical, just quiet, exhausted collapse. I killed him, he says, to the room, to Rowan, to Edric, to every witness who's gathered close enough to hear it. I killed my brother. The boy never touched that sword until I put it in his hand myself. What follows isn't one dramatic conclusion but a slow unwinding of decades, hearings, arrests, every lord implicated by Bellamy's confession, and the list Ilsa never lived to see completed. The Order of Ash dissolves within the month. Rowan, unwilling to keep occupying a throne built on a lie he now fully understands, abdicates in favor of a council chosen for competence rather than bloodline. The Blood Moon prophecy is publicly denounced. Raziel's truth, spoken through my own voice, entered into the record alongside 3 other Blood Moon children quietly removed across the kingdom's history, each finally given back a name too late to matter to them, but not too late for whoever comes after. I'm offered the throne. I decline it. Accepting would mean becoming exactly the institution I spent a year tearing down. I stay long enough to see the council hold, long enough to watch the first honest trials proceed, before stepping back entirely. Ashen opens a forge in the capital within the season, his reputation transformed from convicted rebel to the man who helped end a regent's reign of lies. He still argues with Ren constantly, though it's softened into something closer to old friendship. Ren works alongside the new council, dismantling the last remnants of the Order's influence with a thoroughness that suggests he's finally forgiven himself for ever wearing their robes. My mother and sister return to something like an ordinary life. My sister, 19 now, asks me once whether I regret any of it. I regret what it cost, I tell her. Raziel. Ilsa. I don't regret who I became because of them. I built the school on the edge of the Ashlands itself, close enough to the border that the wasteland's silence still surrounds it most mornings, far enough from the capital that it belongs to something other than the throne's reach. I don't call it a royal academy. I don't call it anything grand at all. It's simply a place for people the world has already decided to fear or discard, the way it decided about a boy born under a red moon, the way it decided about an old blade master exiled on a lie 30 years before that boy needed him most. The first students arrive within the month. Not gifted prodigies hand-picked for talent, but the overlooked, the exiled, the ones other schools wouldn't take. I teach them the way Raziel taught me: breath before blade, control before power, and the same question he asked me by a fire in the ashlands before I had any real answer to give him. What are you training for? Vengeance, or justice? I have my own answer now, one I earned across a year of losses that never stopped costing exactly what they needed to cost. I pass the question forward instead of the answer, the same way Raziel did for me, because I understand now that the answer only means something when a person finds it themselves, through their own fire, their own losses, their own choice about what kind of strength is actually worth building toward. I visit both graves when I can. Raziel's, still marked only by the blade I once planted in the dirt beside it, now replaced by something more permanent that Ashen forged without being asked. Ilse's, closer to the capital, visited more often by my mother and sister than by me, though I make the journey when the school allows it. I stand at Raziel's grave the evening the first class completes their initial year, watching them spar below with the same clumsy, 4-second determination I once brought to our earliest lessons. We did it, I tell the grave. Not the ending you probably imagined. Better, I think. Quieter. The kind that actually lasts. The ashlands don't answer. They never have. But watching my students awkward, determined, some carrying their own versions of the fear I once carried, the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. I was once a lake that started as a puddle evaporating in a desert with no name for what I'd become. Now I have a name again, my own, finally, no longer stripped from any registry, no longer whispered as a curse in frightened corners of a kingdom that spent a year learning better. The prophecy that shaped my entire childhood was always a lie. But the thing I actually became, standing at the edge of the ashlands with a school full of students who no longer have to face the world as broken and alone as I once did, that part was never a curse at all. It was always going to be a choice. I just needed enough time, enough loss, and one stubborn old blade master who refused to let fear decide who I was, to finally learn how to make it.